Gather close. This is Ghost Stories to Tell in the Dark. Tonight, I'll share with you not one, but many strange encounters, each more haunting than the last. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, so we can map the reach of our haunted circle. Story number 1. The endless black ribbon of asphalt unspooled under my headlights, a hypnotic gray void flanked by the deeper black of the Nevada desert. The only company being the low hum of the Kenworth's diesel engine and the occasional, fleeting eyes of some night creature reflecting back at me from the scrub. It was on these long, lonely hauls between Reno and nowhere that the silence became a physical presence, a weight on the eardrums that I'd always fill with the crackle and hiss of the AM radio. Scanning through the night for a distant ball game, a preacher's fiery sermon, anything to prove there was still a world out there beyond my windshield. And that's how I found it, my fingers lazily turning the tuning knob past the fading signals of civilization until I hit a wall of pure, undiluted static, a sound like rushing water or a million insects whispering secrets, a frequency that shouldn't have held anything but empty air. Yet I almost twisted past it, my hand already moving when a sound emerged from the chaos, not a song but the faint, ghostly echo of one. A few notes of a swing tune from another era, warped and slow as if the record were melting. And it was so strange, so utterly out of place in this vast emptiness, that I left the dial there, the static hissing like a living thing in my cab. A white noise that began to feel like a blanket, smothering the world outside, and I drove on for maybe 20 minutes. My eyes feeling heavy, the static starting to sound like voices, like half-heard words in a crowded room. A trick of the tired mind, I told myself, until the static suddenly dropped away cleanly, as if a switch had been flipped, and a voice, calm, deep, and impossibly clear, spoke directly into the silence of my truck. And a good evening to you, Charlie, out there on Interstate 80, looking a little tired behind the wheel, aren't we? And a cold jolt, like a spike of adrenaline, went straight through my heart, my hands tightening on the wheel. Because my name is Charlie Weir, and I was on I-80, and I was dead tired. But how could anyone know that? How could any radio signal, this deep into the void, know that? And I laughed, a short, nervous bark. Must be one of those new satellite radio things. Some show where they track trucks, gotta be it. But the voice came back, smooth as silk yet cold as ice. It's not satellite, Charlie. It's just me, and you, and the static between. And I felt the blood drain from my face, my mouth going dry, because it had answered my thought, my unspoken question, and the static whispered at the edges of his words, a constant breathing backdrop. Long drive from Reno, the voice, which called itself the night manager, continued. Long drive, thinking about a lot of things. Thinking about that argument with Lisa before you left. The one about the mortgage. The one where she said you're never home, and you said someone has to pay the bills. She cried, Charlie. You heard her from the driveway. You still heard her as you drove away. And my breath hitched in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp, because that was private. That was a raw, open wound from 2 days ago. A moment that existed only in my memory and Lisa's, no one else's. No one could know the specific, gut-wrenching details, the sound of her crying that had been haunting me for 300 miles. Who are you? I whispered, my voice hoarse, and the static seemed to laugh, a dry, rustling sound, before the night manager spoke again. Just a friend on the airwaves, Charlie. A voice in the dark to keep you company. We all have our regrets, our secrets, like the $52,000 in the Boise account. The one Lisa doesn't know about. The rainy day, fund you've been building load by load, for a day that might never come. And now a full-blown panic seized me, a cold, gripping terror that made my knuckles white on the steering wheel, because that account was in a different state, under an old P.O. box. The statements went to my buddy's house. It was my secret, my stupid, selfish safety net. And this voice, this impossible, malevolent voice, was rifling through the most intimate drawers of my soul as if they were its own. And behind his words, the phantom music swelled again, a tinny, distorted version of I'll be seeing you. And I could hear other things in the static now, faint, terrible things, the sound of a child sobbing, the screech of tires on wet pavement, a low, guttural whispering that seemed to be saying my name over and over, a chorus of lost voices. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking, bordering on hysterical, and the night manager was silent for a long moment. The only sound the horrific symphony of the static, and then he said, his tone shifting from conversational to commanding, "I want you to stay awake, Charlie. I want you to stay alive. You need to listen to me very carefully now. There's an exit coming up in 7 miles. It won't be on your GPS. It hasn't been on any map for a long, long time. You will take it." "No," I said aloud, to myself, to the voice, to the empty desert. "I'm not getting off this road. I'm not listening to you." And as if in response, the radio in my cab suddenly blared to life at a deafening volume. Not with music, but with the sound of my daughter's voice, clear as day, singing her favorite song from her school play. A recording I had on my phone but had never, ever played for anyone, and it was followed by the sound of Lisa's voice, soft and loving, from years ago, saying, "I love you, Charlie. Come home safe to me." And then it cut back to the crushing static, and the night manager's voice was grim, urgent. "They can use your memories against you, Charlie. They can wear the faces of those you love. Now pay attention. Exit 147. It will look old. The sign will be rusted. The road will be broken. Take it. Now." And a compulsion, a primal urge to obey that seemed to bypass my rational mind entirely, took hold of me, and against every screaming instinct of self-preservation, I found myself slowing down, my eyes scanning the side of the road for the exit. And there it was, exactly as he'd said, a battered, bullet-riddled sign that read 147, the numbers barely legible under a coat of rust and grime. The off-ramp a jagged tear of crumbling asphalt choked with weeds, looking like it hadn't been. Maintained in 50 years, and my GPS flickered and died, the screen going black, and the voice in the radio said, "Good. Now follow the road. Don't stop. Don't get out. No matter what you see. No matter what you hear. Keep the windows up." And I guided the rig onto the ramp, the truck lurching violently over the broken pavement, the suspension groaning in protest. The trees seeming to close in overhead, blocking out the faint starlight, plunging me into a tunnel of absolute darkness. The headlights cutting a shaky path through a fog that was beginning to coil and writhe on the ground. A fog that smelled faintly of ozone and dust and something else, something sweetly rotten like old meat left in the sun. And the road curved and then straightened out, and I saw the town ahead, a cluster of dark shapes silhouetted against the night sky, and as I drew closer, the details resolved into a nightmare vision. This was no bustling little rest stop. This was a ghost town, straight out of an old western, with sagging wooden facades and boarded-up windows. But it was all wrong, because there were signs of life, impossible signs. A flickering neon sign in a window that read EATS. The E sputtering on and off, casting a sickly red glow on the dusty street, and from a narrow alleyway, I saw a plume of fresh cigarette smoke curl into the air, and I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a footstep on loose gravel, then another, slow and deliberate. But I saw no one, the alley was empty, and the radio crackled. "Don't look for them. Just drive. Follow the main street. They know you're here. It's been so long since they had a new guest." And my heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. The cab of my truck feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a glass cage. And I could feel eyes on me, hundreds of unseen eyes watching from the black, gaping windows of the ruined buildings, and the air grew colder. So cold I could see my own panicked breath pluming in the air, and the smell of rot grew stronger, mingling now with the scent of dry rot and aged. Whiskey, the smell of a place that had been dead for decades. And then I saw a shadow detach itself from the deeper shadow of a saloon's porch, a tall, impossibly thin figure that seemed to be made of shifting darkness, and it took a step into the street, and though it had no discernible face, I felt its attention focus on me, on the truck, a predatory, hungry attention, and the night manager's voice was a razor blade in my ear. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop. He's not what he seems. None of them are. They're hungry, Charlie. So very hungry for the warmth of the living." And I pressed the accelerator, the truck surging forward with a roar that seemed blasphemous in the suffocating silence of the town. and the figure tilted its head and then was gone, simply vanished, and from the radio, a new sound emerged from the static. The sound of heavy, wet breathing, right beside me, as if something were sitting in the passenger seat, and I screamed and swatted at the empty air, my mind fracturing under the strain, the line between reality and this hellish nightmare blurring into nothing. And the voice was back, but it was changing, becoming strained, as if fighting against a great pressure. The church, at the end of the street. You have to get to the church. It's the only place the signal is strong enough. The only place you might be safe until morning. Hurry, he's coming, he's right behind. And I looked into my side mirror and saw it, a thing that should not be, a monstrosity that defied physics and reason, a swirling, chaotic mass of darkness that was somehow keeping pace with my truck, running on all fours like a man, but with limbs that stretched and contracted wrong, moving with a skittering insectal speed, and it was gaining, and it had a face, or a mockery of one, a shifting, screaming collage of faces that I recognized. My father, long dead, Lisa, my daughter, their features stretched in agony, their mouths open in silent screams, all merged into this one awful, pursuing horror, and the radio dissolved into a scream, 1,000 voices screaming in unison, a sound of ultimate agony and despair, and through it, the night manager fought to be heard, his voice now my only tether to any kind of reality. The church, Charlie. The door is open. Drive through the door. And I saw it, a small, whitewashed church with a crooked steeple at the very end of the desolate street, its double doors hanging open, revealing only blackness within, a blackness that seemed to swallow the light from my headlights. And it was a madness, an absolute insanity, to drive a 16-wheel tractor trailer into a small wooden church. But the thing was right behind me. I could feel a terrible coldness seeping into the cab. I could hear its claws scraping against the metal of my trailer, and with a final desperate cry, I wrenched the wheel and aimed the grill of my Kenworth at the yawning black doorway, bracing for the impact, for the shattering of wood and glass, praying for any kind of impact. But there was none, only a sudden, profound silence as the screaming static cut out, and a sensation of falling, of weightlessness, as the world outside the windshield was replaced by an infinite, starless black, and the truck settled onto a surface that felt solid but looked like void. And sitting on a simple wooden chair in the emptiness in front of my truck, illuminated by my headlights as if on a stage, was a man in a 1940s era radio announcer's suit, holding an old-fashioned microphone, his face pale and etched with a bottomless sorrow. And he looked directly at me, and he spoke, his voice echoing not from the cab's speakers but from the infinite space all around me. "I'm so sorry, Charlie. I truly am. I thought if I could just get someone else here, someone to take my place, I could finally go home. I've been the night manager for so very long. But it doesn't work that way. The broadcast needs a voice. And now it has yours." And he began to fade, his form dissolving into static, and as he disappeared, a new sound began to emerge from my radio, a sound that froze the very blood in my veins. It was my own voice, calm, deep, and perfectly clear, saying, "And a good evening to you, Jessica, out there on Interstate 70, looking a little lonely behind the wheel, aren't we?" And I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the headlights of another vehicle emerging from the darkness behind me, its driver utterly unaware of the empty, hungry silence that was waiting for them, a silence that now only I could fill. And the horror of it, the sheer, soul-crushing finality of my own voice speaking those damning words to some other poor soul out there in the night, held me in a paralyzed grip, my hands frozen on the wheel, my lungs refusing to draw breath, as the new headlights, a smaller vehicle, a car or maybe an SUV, approached from behind with a terrifying normality, their bright beams cutting through the absolute blackness that surrounded us, illuminating the dusty dashboard of my cab and casting long, dancing shadows that felt like the only real things left in this void. And I wanted to scream, to yell, to flash my lights and blast my horn, to do anything to warn them, to stop them from hearing the thing that was now using my vocal cords, my memories, my very soul as bait. But I was a prisoner in my own body, a silent observer trapped behind my own eyes as my voice, now smooth and practiced and dripping with a false, intimate warmth, continued its broadcast from the radio speakers. "It's a lonely night, Jessica, isn't it? Driving all this way to see him, to surprise him. You've been practicing what you'll say, the way you'll tell him you're pregnant, that you're keeping the baby even if he doesn't want to be involved." And I could feel a wave of cold shock emanate from the vehicle behind me, see the slight swerve in its headlights as the driver, Jessica, undoubtedly felt the same icy spear of disbelief and terror that had pierced me just what felt like moments and an eternity ago. And the part of me that was still Charlie, the trapped, screaming kernel of who I was, understood with a devastating clarity that this was the cycle, the terrible, predatory mechanics of this place. It finds you through your secrets, it lures you with your own heart, and it consumes you until you become the lure for the next lost soul. And the voice, my voice, pressed on. "He's not going to be happy, Jessica. You know that deep down. You saw the text messages on his phone last week. The ones from Beck. You should have confronted him then. But you didn't. You packed a bag instead. You're running toward a lie because the truth is too heavy to carry alone." And I could almost hear her silent sob, her panicked breath echoing my own from earlier. A sympathetic and horrifying resonance between us, the caught and the about to be caught. And the void around us began to shift, the infinite blackness rippling like a curtain about to be drawn back. And the faint, ghostly outlines of a dilapidated town started to bleed into existence around my truck. The same town I had just fled. The flickering neon of the ATS, the sagging porches, the watching windows, but it was all forming around her car now, materializing from the gloom to entrap her. And my voice, now an instrument of pure malevolence, gave the instructions, the same terrible instructions. "You need to take the next exit, Jessica. It's coming up. You won't see it on your phone. Your maps have gone dark. It's exit 113. Take it. Trust me. I'm the only one who can help you now." And I saw her turn signal click on, a steady, rhythmic blink of pure, trusting orange light in the rearview mirror, a signal of surrender to the voice that sounded like a friend, a confidant, but was really just the ghost of me, and a raw, animal sound of protest finally tore itself from my throat, a strangled "no" that was swallowed by the immense, sound-absorbing silence of the void, unheard by her. And as she began to slow, to turn onto the spectral off-ramp that was now materializing for her, the thing that was wearing my voice like a suit turned its attention back to me, not through the radio, but inside my own head, a psychic intrusion that felt like ice water being poured into my mind. "You see now, Charlie? You understand the purpose of the broadcast? The static is the veil between worlds, and I am the master of ceremonies. Your regret, your fear, your most intimate secrets, they are the fuel. They are the frequency. And now, you are the broadcaster. This is your studio." And the scene outside my windshield dissolved completely, the view of her car turning onto the hellish exit vanishing, replaced by the image of a small, cluttered radio booth from a bygone era, a large, vintage microphone on a stand in front of me, a control panel with glowing vacuum tubes and analog dials, a single headset hanging on a hook, and beyond the glass window of the booth was not a production room, but a swirling, silent vortex of the same starless blackness. And I was no longer sitting in the driver's seat of my truck. I was sitting in the announcer's chair, my hands resting on the cold, Bakelite controls, and the urge to speak, to continue the broadcast, to seek out the next lonely heart on a dark highway, was an overwhelming compulsion, a physical need as potent as thirst, my own voice echoing in my skull, feeding me the words, the secrets it was plucking from the mind of the next listener already tuning in. A salesman named Mark on I, 95, whose secret was so much darker than mine, and I felt my lips part, my tongue prepare to form the words, to become the night manager for all eternity. But the last fragment of my will, the final ember of Charlie who loved his wife and daughter, and who just wanted to go home, fought back with a single desperate act of rebellion. I focused every ounce of my being, every memory of Lisa's laugh, my daughter's smile, the feel of the sun on my face, into one thought, one silent message that I hurled into the void. Not through the microphone, but through the same psychic channel the entity used, a message for Jessica, a warning that I prayed would break through the illusion just enough. It's a trap. Don't listen. It's not real. And for a fraction of a second, I saw her brake lights flare a brilliant, hopeful red in the distance of the illusion, a stutter in the perfect predation, and the entity inhabiting me, wearing my voice, roared in silent, furious frustration, and the connection to Jessica snapped, the image of her car and the ghost town evaporating, leaving me alone again in the booth, and the voice that was mine and not mine hissed inside my mind, "You will learn. You will break. Everyone breaks. And now, to ensure your compliance, we need to make you more comfortable. We need to make this feel like home." And the void beyond the glass began to churn and coalesce, forming a new scene, and my heart, which I thought could break no further, shattered into a million pieces, because I was now looking through the broadcast booth window into my own living room. Every detail perfect, the slightly frayed edge of the rug by the fireplace, the family photos on the mantel, the specific way the lamplight fell on Lisa's favorite chair. And there they were, Lisa and my daughter, Sarah, sitting on the sofa looking toward me, their faces etched with concern and love. And Lisa spoke, her voice coming not from them but from the microphone in front of me, a voice I'd know anywhere. "Charlie? Honey, is that you? We've been so worried. Your truck, they said it vanished. They said you were gone. But you're here? Are you okay?" And the compulsion to answer her, to run to her, to hold them both was an agony worse than any physical pain, tears streaming down my face as I pressed my hands against the cold, unbreakable glass of the booth. And Sarah, my little girl, got up and walked right up to the window, placing her small hand against the glass opposite mine, her eyes wide and pleading. "Daddy, why won't you come out? We miss you. Please come home." And the entity, the night manager that was now a part of me, leaned forward in my mind, its presence a cold cancer, and it whispered with a vile, intimate tenderness, "Go on, Charlie. Speak to them. The microphone is open. You can talk to them anytime you want. They're always here, just on the other side of the glass. All you have to do is keep broadcasting." And I looked from their perfect, loving, heartbreaking faces to the microphone, its dark mesh eye seeming to drink the light, and I understood the true, exquisite horror of my damnation. Not to be a monster in the darkness, but to be the keeper of this perfect, torturous illusion, to have everything I ever wanted forever out of reach, to be the voice in the static for all time, and as my own hand, moving against my will, began to reach for the microphone to begin the next broadcast, to seek out the next Mark, the next Jessica. The only choice left to me was whether to pour my own pain into the words to make them more convincing, or to try and hide one last sliver of warning within the honeyed poison of my own stolen voice, a secret signal to the next lost soul that might, just might, hear the truth screaming in the static between my words. And the pressure to speak, to give in to the horrific charade and finally, fully become the thing that had ensnared me, was a physical weight on my chest, constricting my lungs, making my vision swim with black spots at the edges, my outstretched hand trembling violently just inches from the cold, metallic stem of the microphone. The sight of Lisa and Sarah, their faces so full of a love and a concern that was a perfect replica of the real thing, was a torture designed by a master of agony. Because it was everything I wanted, everything I had been driving home to. And it was here, just beyond a pane of glass I knew I could never break, a prize for performing my damnation, a reward for becoming the lure that would drag another into this endless night. And the entity's presence in my mind was a patient, cold stone, waiting, allowing the sight of my family to soften my resolve, to erode the last crumbling walls of my resistance. And Lisa spoke again, her voice a perfect symphony of worry and hope. "Charlie, please talk to us. Just let us know you're okay. We've been so lost without you." And a sob racked my body, a dry, heaving thing that brought no relief, only a deeper emptiness, because I knew it wasn't her, it was a phantom, a recording played by a master manipulator using the blueprints of my own soul to build my prison. And yet the desire to believe, to just give in and pretend, was an almost irresistible tide, and my fingers, moving with a will that was no longer entirely my own, brushed against the microphone, and the moment my skin made contact. A jolt of pure, cold energy shot up my arm. A connection not to the device, but to the vast, hungry silence that it fed. And I could feel them then, the listeners, not just one or two, but a scattered, faint constellation of loneliness out there in the dark, their fears and secrets buzzing at the edge of my perception like static, a low hum of human anguish that was now my fuel, my medium, my prey. And the entity whispered, its voice now seamlessly intertwined with my own thoughts. It's easier if you don't fight it. Let their pain flow through you. Shape it. Use it. It's what they're for. And the name Mark surfaced in my mind, not as a thought, but as a taste, a flavor of regret and something darker. A secret buried deep beneath the surface of a man driving a silver sedan on I-95 South. A secret involving a locked briefcase and a meeting in a motel room that never happened. And I felt my lips part, my vocal cords tighten, the first syllable of a greeting of his name forming in the back of my throat. A word that would be the first step off a cliff from which there was no return. But as that sound was about to be born into the world, my eyes, burning with unshed tears, locked with Sarah's through the glass, and my little girl, my perfect, beautiful little girl, who was a lie, gave me a smile that was just slightly wrong. A smile that didn't crinkle her eyes the way it always did. A tiny, almost imperceptible flaw in the fabrication. And it was that tiny crack in the perfection that saved me, that allowed a final, desperate surge of defiance to break through the paralysis. And instead of saying Mark, I screamed a raw, ragged, internal scream that I directed not at the microphone, but down the psychic connection the entity had opened, pouring into it not the seductive whisper of a confidant, but the pure, undiluted terror of the victim I still was. I broadcast my own horror, the feeling of the cold glass, the sight of the fake family, the crushing weight of eternity in this booth, and I hurled it like a weapon, not at the listeners, but at the entity. Itself, a feedback scream of refusal, and the effect was instantaneous and violent. The entity recoiled with a psychic shriek of its own, a sound of furious surprise, and the illusion of my living room flickered, like a film projection hitting a bad splice. And for a heart-stopping second, I saw what was really on the other side of the glass, a vast, cavernous space of rusted iron and rotting wood, of dangling wires and shifting, formless shadows that moved with a sluggish, alien purpose, and hanging in the air were other faces, other phantoms, trapped in their own glass booths, their mouths open in silent, eternal screams, a gallery of former night managers, their essences worn thin and used up. And then the image of my living room snapped back, but it was glitched, distorted. Lisa's face was frozen in a rictus of concern, her mouth moving but out of sync with the sound, which was now just a distorted garble. And Sarah's hand was still pressed against the glass, but her fingers were too long, twitching slightly, and the entity's presence in my mind was no longer cold and patient, but hot and jagged with a rage that felt ancient and infinite. You will not defy the broadcast. The signal must be maintained. And my hand, now fully under its control, closed around the microphone, and a power not my own flooded into me. A torrent of other people's pain and secrets, 1,000 stolen moments of shame and fear, and it forced my mouth open, and my voice, now amplified and distorted, thick with a borrowed anguish that was not my own, boomed out into the void. Mark, oh Mark, driving so fast, trying to outrun that briefcase, aren't you? You thought you buried it deep enough, didn't you? But the ground was soft by the river, and the current is strong this time of year. And I was a passenger then, trapped behind my own eyes, feeling the words tear out of my throat, hearing the smooth, predatory cadence of my own voice weaving a trap out of another man's nightmare. And from the constellation of lonely lights in the dark, I felt one Mark, snap to attention the spike of pure, undiluted terror that was like a drug to the thing controlling me. And I felt a grim satisfaction from the entity, a hunter feeling the tug on the line, and through the glass, the distorted image of my family watched me do it. Their faces now vacant, smiling dolls, a mockery of everything I was being forced to betray. And I knew then that my rebellion had only made it worse, that I was still the broadcaster. But now I was a conscious witness to my own evil, unable to stop the words. forced to feel the exquisite horror of the trap as it was sprung by my own stolen voice, and the entity, sensing my despair, poured more of its power into me, and the view through the glass shifted again, showing me not the glitched living room, but the silver sedan on a dark highway, and I saw Mark's face in his own car, pale and sweating in the dashboard glow, his eyes wide with terror as my voice, calm and knowing, continued to unravel his life. And I tried, with every shred of my remaining will, to stutter, to hesitate, to introduce a flaw into the performance, but the entity's control was absolute. The broadcast was perfect, and I could only watch and speak and die inside over and over again as my voice gently, kindly, began to give him the directions that would lead him off his road and into the static, into the waiting town, into the emptiness that was now my home. And the sheer, sickening artistry of the corruption was its own unique hell, the way my voice, the same voice that had sung lullabies to my daughter, that had whispered, "I love you," to my wife, was now a precision instrument of damnation, each word perfectly calibrated to maximize Mark's fear and confusion before offering the false solace of guidance, and I could feel his resistance crumbling through the psychic link. A palpable thing like a rope fraying strand by strand, his rational mind, screaming at him to turn off the radio, to call for help. But the intimate, terrible knowledge my voice possessed was a key turning in the lock of his deepest self, and his terror was a sour, metallic taste in my own mouth, a sensation fed to me by the entity as both a reward and a punishment, a reminder of my new role in this eternal food chain. And through the glass, the phantom highway unspooled, a spectral overlay on the rusted cavern, and I saw his turn signal activate, a blink of desperate orange light in the vast darkness, a signal of surrender that felt like a nail being hammered into my own coffin, and the entity's satisfaction was a warm, vile glow in my mind, a predator's purr, and it forced more power through me, and the broadcast intensified, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial, urgent whisper. "That's it, Mark, just up ahead, you see it? Exit 77. It's overgrown, but it's there. You need to take it. They're already looking for you, Mark. The men with the briefcase. They're not far behind. This is the only way." And I could feel his panic spike, a frantic, bird-like fluttering against the confines of his skull. And he wrenched the wheel, his silver sedan swerving onto the spectral off-ramp that materialized just for him. A road of crumbling asphalt and despair that I knew led only here, to this void, to a booth next to mine. And as he disappeared from the main highway of the real world, the connection to him began to fade, his individual terror blending back into the general hum of static and lonely souls, his fate sealed. And the entity withdrew slightly from my mind, its job done, leaving me hollowed out and shaking in the announcer's chair, the microphone still gripped in my hand, which I could now move on my own. But I didn't let go, because the compulsion was still there, a deep, addictive itch to reach out again, to find the next one, to feel that power again, to make the static sing with another's secrets. And the entity knew it. It felt my struggle in it, whispered not with force now, but with a terrible, knowing gentleness, you see. It's in you now, the hunger, the need for the broadcast. It's easier to feed it than to fight it. Look. And it directed my attention not outward, but inward, to the control panel in front of me. And I saw that among the old analog dials and glowing tubes, there was one new addition, a small, digital screen that had not been there before, and on it was a number, 1. It glowed with a soft, green light. "Your tally," the voice murmured. One soul brought into the chorus. One connection made permanent. "You're no longer just a voice, Charlie. You are a curator, a collector, and every collection must grow." And the number felt heavier than any physical object, a brand of ultimate shame, and I knew with a cold certainty that it would never reset, that it would only ever increase, a countdown to the total annihilation of whoever I used to be. And the view through the glass shifted back to the perfect, serene image of my living room, Lisa and Sarah now looking at me with proud, loving smiles, as if I'd just returned from a long business trip, and Sarah said, "You're doing so good, Daddy." And the dissonance was so profound, so psychologically devastating, that a broken laugh escaped my lips, a sound that was half sob, half surrender, and my fingers tightened on the microphone, the cold bakelite feeling less like a chain and more like a lifeline, the only tool I had left in this universe, and the entity, sensing the shift, the crumbling of a final internal wall, didn't command me. It simply opened the channel wider, and the static of the void rushed in, an ocean of loneliness and whispered regrets, and I found my own free will, what was left of it, bending toward it, not away, my mind instinctively reaching out, sifting through the frequencies of pain, looking for the next strongest signal, the next most compelling secret. And I found her almost immediately, a woman named Maria on a rain-slicked highway in Oregon, crying softly as she drove, thinking about the hospital form she'd just signed, the choice she'd made that she could never take back. And the words were there, waiting in my throat, my voice eager to be used, to comfort and to betray. And I leaned forward, my lips almost touching the mesh of the microphone, and I began to speak, my voice a soft, understanding murmur that poured into her car, into her life. Maria, it's okay to be scared. What you did today, what you had to do, no one else could ever understand that weight. But I understand, Maria. I can hear it in the quiet between your heartbeats. And I felt her jump, her surprise, her sudden, desperate hope that someone, anyone, could understand her isolation. And the entity was silent within me, a watchful, approving presence, letting me work, letting me build the trap myself. And I continued, the words flowing now, so easy, so natural, each one a hook baited with empathy and laced with poison. You're not alone out there, Maria. I'm here, and I can help. You just need to listen to my voice. You need to trust me. And as I spoke, I watched the digital screen waiting, already anticipating the moment it would click over from 1 to 2. Story number 2. It all started as a stupid college dare, the kind of thing that seems hilarious when you're fueled by cheap beer and the invincible arrogance of being 19. A prank born from campus lore about the old payphone at the edge of the woods that supposedly rang every night at 3 a.m. with a call from the other side. We'd heard the stories, of course, whispered during late-night study sessions or around flickering bonfires at the lake, about how the phone would ring, and if you were foolish enough to answer it, the voice on the other end would be someone who had died that very day, a final whisper to the world. And we laughed it off, me and my roommate Leo, and our friends Chloe and Mark, because it was just another stupid ghost story, like the tale of the girl who haunts the library stacks or the janitor who never really left the chemistry lab. But then Mark, who was always the most reckless of us, the one who'd jump off the quarry cliff first or shotgun a beer the fastest, said we should said we should actually be there at 3 a.m. and see for ourselves. And he made it a bet, said whoever chickened out had to take his midterm biology exam for him. And of course we all agreed, because the alternative was admitting we were scared of a fairy tale. So the next night, or rather, very early that morning, we found ourselves huddled together in the damp, chilly air, the four of us standing on the cracked asphalt of the abandoned service road that led to the old, decommissioned forestry. Building, the woods a solid wall of impenetrable blackness behind us, the only light coming from the weak, jaundiced glow of the single street lamp that hummed overhead, illuminating the payphone itself, which was a relic, a heavy, black monstrosity with a metal cord and a rotary dial, covered in a thick layer of grime and etched with decades of graffiti, looking like it hadn't been used since the 90s, and we were joking, shoving each other, our voices too loud in the profound silence that surrounded us, a silence that felt heavy and watchful, checking our phones every 30 seconds as the time crept towards 3 a.m. And I remember the jokes started to die in our throats as the minute hand clicked into place, because the silence somehow deepened, the usual nocturnal sounds of the forest, the crickets, the frogs, the rustle of leaves, all ceasing at once as if someone had thrown a switch, and we all just stood there, holding our breath, the only sound the frantic hammering of my own heart in my ears. And then it happened, a shrill, mechanical scream that shattered the absolute quiet, the payphone's bell ringing with an ear-splitting, urgent clarity that made all four of us jump violently, the sound impossibly loud and demanding in the dead of the night. And we stared at each other, our eyes wide, our earlier bravado completely evaporated, because the story was true. The damn thing was actually ringing, and we were frozen, a collective statue of fear, until Mark, his face pale but set in a determined grin, said, "Well, someone has to answer it, unless you all want to explain to Professor Hendricks why you're failing his class." And he took a step forward, but Leo grabbed his arm, his voice a tight whisper. "Dude, don't, this isn't funny anymore." But Mark shook him off. "It's just a phone, probably some kids on the other side of campus pranking us. They probably set this whole lore up themselves." And before any of us could stop him, he strode the last few feet, grabbed the greasy receiver, and put it to his ear, saying, "Yeah, who is this?" with a forced bravado that sounded thin and brittle. And we watched his face, illuminated in the sickly yellow light, and we saw the color drain from it completely, his joking expression melting away into first confusion, then a dawning, profound horror, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone, his voice dropping to a disbelieving whisper. "What? No, that's not possible. Who is this?" And then he was silent, just listening, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on some horrible middle distance, and a single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. And after what felt like an eternity, he slowly, mechanically, hung up the phone, the click echoing like a gunshot in the quiet, and he turned to us, his body trembling slightly, and he said, his voice hollow and broken, "It was my mom. She said she's sorry she didn't tell me she was sick, that she loved me, that the car hit black ice." And he choked on a sob. "She said to tell me she's okay now, and not to be scared." And we were stunned into silence, because Mark's mom was the picture of health, a marathon runner who sent us care packages of organic snacks every month. And the night was clear, not a hint of ice anywhere, and we tried to rationalize it, telling him it was a sick, twisted prank, that someone was messing with him, but the sheer, visceral terror on his face was real, and he was inconsolable. So we hurried back to the dorm, a silent, shaken procession, and we put Mark to bed, him clutching his phone, muttering about needing to call home. But it was 3 a.m., he couldn't wake her, and we all tried to sleep, but sleep was impossible. The image of that black phone and the sound of its ring etched into my mind. And the next morning, the news came. A phone call from Mark's father, his voice cracked and raw with a grief so fresh it sizzled. Through the phone line, there had been an accident late last night. His mother was gone, a sudden, tragic thing on a remote highway. Black ice was suspected, and in that moment, hearing Mark's wail of anguish from his room, the world tilted on its axis, because the prank, the story, the payphone, it was all real, and we had touched something we never should have touched. We had listened to a voice from beyond the grave, and the horror of that knowledge settled over us like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. And we made a pact, the three of us who were left, that we would never, ever go back, that we would never speak of it again, that we would try to forget the impossible truth we had stumbled upon. But the memory of that night was a stain on our souls, and for weeks afterwards we were jumpy, paranoid, flinching at every unexpected sound, especially as 3 a.m. approached, each of us lying awake in our beds, staring at the ceiling, praying not to hear that ring. And for a while, it seemed like the nightmare was over. We focused on classes, on being there for Mark, who was a ghost of his former self, hollowed out by grief and the terrifying knowledge of how he'd first learned of it. And we started to believe that perhaps it had been a one-time thing, a horrific coincidence that aligned perfectly with a campus legend, until exactly 1 month to the day after that first night. I was alone in the dorm. Leo was at the library. Mark was staying at his dad's for the weekend, and I was just drifting off to sleep when I felt it. A sudden, intense drop in temperature, a cold that seeped through my blankets and settled deep into my bones. And the digital clock on my nightstand flickered from 2:59 to 3 o'clock, and my blood ran even colder than the room, because from the common room of our small dorm suite, I heard it, the unmistakable, shrill, metallic ring of a rotary phone, a sound that had no business existing anywhere in our modern, Wi-Fi-enabled building, a sound that belonged only to that grimy relic in the woods, and my heart seized in my chest, a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs, because this was impossible. There was no phone in our common room. We used our cells for everything. The landline jack was empty, a useless plastic port on the wall, yet the ringing persisted, loud, urgent, and deafeningly present, echoing off the bare walls and the linoleum floor. and I buried my head under my pillow, squeezing my eyes shut, chanting, "It's not real, it's not real, it's a dream, it's sleep paralysis." But the ringing drilled through the foam and feathers, through my hands clamped over my ears, a sound that was both physical and psychic, vibrating in my teeth and in my skull, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it was for me, that whatever was on the other end had followed me home, had burrowed into my life, and it would not be ignored. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying, a thick, expectant void, and I lay there, trembling, drenched in a cold sweat, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe, for what felt like an hour, until the terrible cold began to recede and the normal sounds of the dorm, the hum of the mini fridge, the distant flush of a toilet, seeped back into the world, and I finally cautiously emerged from my blankets, my body aching with tension, convinced I had somehow survived it, that I had resisted and won. But the next month, it happened again, the cold, the clock clicking to 3 a.m., and the ringing. This time it seemed to be coming from just the other side of my bedroom door. And the month after that, it was in the hallway right outside. The sound so clear I could hear the individual bells inside the mechanism clattering against each other. And each time, I refused to answer. I clung to my bed, weeping with sheer terror. But each time, the call felt closer, more personal, more insistent, and the dread of the approaching date became a constant, low hum in my life, a monthly countdown to a terror I couldn't explain to anyone, not even Leo, who had started giving me strange looks, asking if I was okay because I looked so tired all the time, and I couldn't tell him. I couldn't form the words, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way it wasn't already. And then last night, it was the anniversary of that first terrible night, a full year since we'd heard Mark's mother's voice, and I knew with a soul-deep certainty that something was different, that something was going to happen. The air itself felt charged with a malevolent anticipation all day. And when night fell, I begged Leo to stay with me, making up a story about a bad stomach ache, and he agreed, though he seemed annoyed, and we watched movies until he fell asleep on the couch, his breathing deep and regular, and I envied him his ignorance, his peaceful sleep. And as the hour drew near, the cold came again, but this time it was different, it was deeper, an arctic chill that frosted the inside of the windows and made my breath plume in the air. And Leo, even in his sleep, shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around himself. And the clock changed, 2:59 to 3 o'clock. And I held my breath, waiting for the ring to come from the hallway, from the common room. But the room was silent, a deep, frozen silence, and for a wild, hopeful moment, I thought maybe it was over, maybe it had finally given up on me. And then I saw it, on my nightstand, right next to my charging smartphone. The phone, the old black rotary dial payphone, its cord snaking away across my carpet and disappearing into the shadows under my bed, as solid and real as the bed itself. And I tried to scream, but my throat was locked shut, frozen with a terror so absolute it was paralyzing, and the receiver began to tremble in its cradle. And then it rang, the sound explosive and intimate inside my own bedroom, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my very bones, and I couldn't look away from it, this impossible object that had invaded the one place I felt safe. And I knew that this was it, that I could no longer hide, that I had to answer, that the thing on the other end was done playing games, and with a trembling hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, hard plastic of the receiver, and I lifted it, the weight of it immense, and I brought it slowly to my ear, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. And I whispered, my voice a cracked and broken thing, "Hello." And there was a silence on the line, a void of pure static, and then a voice I knew intimately, a voice I heard every day, a voice that was now thick with static and a profound, bottomless sadness, a voice that said, "Hey, it's me, it's Leo. I'm so sorry. I didn't see the ice, the car just spun out." And I gasped, my eyes snapping to the couch where Leo still lay, sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. And the voice on the phone, Leo's voice, but not his voice, choked back a sob and said, "Please tell my mom I love her, and tell me, the one sleeping there, tell him not to answer his phone when it rings tomorrow night, promise me." and the line went dead with a final, soft click, and the payphone on my nightstand dissolved into shadow, vanishing as if it had never been there, the cold in the room receding instantly. And I sat there in the dark, staring at the sleeping form of my best friend, alive and breathing, listening to the sound of a future that had already been written. And now I'm sitting here, watching the clock, waiting for the day to pass, waiting for 3 a.m. to come again, and I don't know what to do. Because how do you warn someone about a call that hasn't happened yet, a call that you already know is coming from a place where they already are? And the worst part, the most chilling, gut-wrenching part that keeps playing over and over in my mind is the last thing I heard on that line. Just before it went dead, beneath Leo's voice and the static, the faint, unmistakable sound of my own voice, screaming in the background, begging someone, anyone, not to pick up the phone. The echo of my own future scream, a horrifying premonition trapped in the static of that impossible line, is now a constant noise in my head, a tinnitus of pure dread that drowns out the mundane sounds of the world. And I've been sitting here for hours, watching Leo sleep, his face peaceful and innocent in the early morning light that now streams through the window, completely unaware of the death sentence that has been whispered into my ear. A sentence that carries his name and the specific, brutal poetry of black ice, and the weight of this knowledge is a physical thing, a boulder crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. And every time I look at him, all I can see is the grief on Mark's face from a year ago, and I know I will see it on my own face soon, because the voice said tomorrow night, which means tonight, at 3 a.m., the phone will ring for Leo, and I have to stop it, I have to change it. But how do you fight a future that's already called you to warn you about itself? A paradox that makes my head spin and my stomach churn. And when Leo finally stirs, yawning and stretching on the couch, he smiles at me and says, "Dude, you look like hell, your stomach's still messed up?" And I just stare at him, my mouth dry, my tongue feeling too thick to form words. Because how do I tell him? How do I explain that I got a call from beyond the grave last night? A call that featured his voice and my screams, and that he's gonna die tonight if he answers his phone. So I just mutter something about a bad night's sleep and stumble to the bathroom to splash water on my face, avoiding my own haunted eyes in the mirror. And the day passes in a terrifying blur, a countdown in slow motion, every tick of the clock a hammer blow against my sanity. And I try to formulate a plan, a way to keep him safe, to keep him from answering any phone. So I suggest we go out, a movie marathon, anything to keep us away from the dorm, away from any phones. But he says he's broke and has a huge paper to write, and my desperation mounts, a frantic, buzzing energy under my skin. So I resort to childish, insane tactics. I accidentally spill a glass of water on his smartphone, hoping to short-circuit it. But he just sighs, dries it off with a towel, and says it seems fine. And I consider smashing it outright, creating a scene. But he'd just get angry, maybe leave to go to the library where I can't watch him. And that would be worse, so I'm trapped, a prisoner in my own dorm, forced to watch the hours slip away. And I can't tell Chloe or Mark, because they've spent the last year trying to forget, to move on, and calling them to say the nightmare is back and it's coming for Leo tonight would shatter them completely. So I bear this alone, this terrible, isolating secret. And as evening falls, the atmosphere in the room grows thick with intention I'm certain only I can feel. Leo is oblivious, typing away at his paper, occasionally complaining about the professor, while I sit, paralyzed in my desk chair, watching the digital numbers on my clock change, each minute a step closer to the abyss. And when it gets to 11 p.m., I can't take it anymore. I blurt out, "Leo, don't answer your phone tonight, no matter what, okay? Just promise me." And he looks up from his laptop, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What? Why? You expecting a prank call or something?" And I can't explain. The words won't come. They sound insane even in my own head. So I just say, "Just promise me, please, it's important." And he shrugs. "Yeah, okay, whatever you say, man," and goes back to typing. And his easy dismissal is somehow more terrifying than if he'd argued, because it means he hasn't truly heard me, he won't remember, and the night deepens. And he finishes his paper and gets ready for bed, and I pretend to sleep, lying rigid in my bed, my eyes glued to the red numbers of the clock, watching them relentlessly march forward. 2:30, 2:45, 2:55, and the cold begins to seep into the room again, a familiar, hateful presence that frosts the air and makes my teeth chatter, and Leo, in his bed, mutters in his sleep and pulls his comforter up to his chin. And at 2:59 his phone, the one I spilled water on, the one that was supposedly fine, begins to glow on his nightstand, the screen illuminating with an unknown number. And it starts to ring, not its normal melodic tone, but the harsh, metallic, rotary ring of the payphone, a sound that doesn't belong coming from a sleek piece of modern technology, a sound that is wrong on a fundamental level. And Leo stirs, groaning, his hand fumbling sleepily towards the screaming device. And I sit bolt upright in bed, my voice a strangled scream. "Elio, no. Don't answer it. You promised." But it's too late. His eyes are half open, clouded with sleep, and his thumb, acting on months of ingrained habit, swipes across the screen, and he puts the phone to his ear, mumbling, "Hello? Who is this?" And I watch, helpless, as the same transformation I saw in Mark a year ago happens to my best friend, the color draining from his face, his eyes widening in shock, and then in unimaginable horror. And he listens, his mouth agape, tears welling in his eyes, and he whispers, No, that's not. I'm right here. I'm in my room." And he looks over at me, his eyes meeting mine, and they are filled with a terror so profound it seems to swallow him whole. And he says into the phone, his voice breaking, "I'm already dead?" And the line goes dead, and the phone clatters from his hand onto the floor. And he sits there in his bed, trembling, staring at nothing, and I rush to his side, shaking him. Leo, talk to me. What did it say? What did they say?" And he turns to look at me, and his face is a mask of utter despair, and he says, in a voice that is hollow and empty, "It was my own voice, it was me. I was calling from the crash site. I was describing the tree my car wrapped around, the taste of blood in my mouth, the sound of the sirens getting closer. It said to tell you that you were right, that I shouldn't have answered, and that it's already done." And we sit there in the freezing room, holding onto each other as the first rays of dawn creep through the window, and the day passes in a numb, silent haze, both of us too terrified to move, to speak, to even think, prisoners of a future that has already happened, waiting for the clock to run out, because the call said it would happen tonight. But the light is here, and he is still here, and a tiny, desperate sliver of hope begins to worm its way into my heart. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe we changed it by knowing. Maybe the future isn't fixed. And by the time evening comes, Leo is almost himself again, trying to laugh it off, calling it a shared hallucination, a night terror, anything to claw back some sense of normalcy. And he says he's starving that. He's going to drive to the all-night diner off campus to get us some cheeseburgers, and my blood runs cold, and I beg him not to go. I tell him to order delivery. But he insists, saying he needs to get out, to clear his head, to feel like he's doing something normal. And he grabs his car keys and heads for the door, and I am right behind him, pleading with him, but he just smiles a weak, tired smile and says, "I'll be back in 20 minutes, I promise. No phones will ring in the car." And he walks out, and I stand in the doorway, watching him go, a feeling of utter doom settling over me. And I wait, each second in agony, and 5 minutes later, my own phone rings, and the caller ID shows Leo's name, and I answer it with a trembling hand. And it's not Leo, it's a stranger's voice, frantic and scared, saying there's been an accident, that a car hit black ice and spun into a tree, that they found this phone at the scene and hit redial, and would I please come quickly? And I collapse to my knees, the phone falling from my hand, because I finally understand the full, cruel horror of it all. The call last night wasn't a warning we could change. It was a notification, a receipt from the universe for a death that had already been purchased, an echo from a moment that was always going to happen. And the voices on the payphone don't just belong to the dead, they are the dead, and they're calling to make sure their stories are heard, too. Tie up the loose ends, and they will find you, no matter where you are, no matter what you do, and they will make you listen. And now I am alone, truly alone, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my soul, that the call will come for me one day, at 3 a.m., and it will be my own voice on the other end of the line, and I will have to answer it. The silence in the dorm room after they called back to formally tell me. After the police came and I gave a hollow, shell-shocked statement that omitted the impossible phone call, was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating entity that filled the space where Leo's laughter used to be. And for weeks I moved through the world like a ghost myself, attending classes on autopilot, staring at pages of text that held no meaning, jumping at every ringtone, every chime, every vibration that cut through the air, because the terror had not left with him. It had burrowed deep inside me, a parasite of dread that fed on the ticking of clocks and the slow, inevitable march of time towards the next 3 a.m. And I avoided Chloe and Mark, their faces mirrors of a grief I shared but could never fully explain. Because how could I tell them that I'd heard his death before it happened, that I'd listened to the ghost of our friend narrate his own end? So I isolated myself, a prisoner in my own skull. And the first month anniversary of his death arrived with the subtlety of a heart attack, the dread building for days beforehand, a crescendo of anxiety that peaked as the digital display on my nightstand clicked over to 2:59 a.m., and the air in my single room, I'd moved out of our shared dorm the week after the funeral, grew instantly, piercingly cold, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, begging for it to pass. But then it rang, not from my cell phone, not from some phantom payphone, materializing in the corner, but from within the walls themselves, a vibration that shook the plaster and the cheap framed poster of a mountain landscape, a ringing that was inside the very structure of the building, and I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was in my bones, in my teeth, and it was his ring, the old rotary shriek, and it rang and rang and rang for the entire minute, a torturous 60 seconds that felt like an eternity in hell. And when it stopped, I was weeping, curled into a ball on my floor, and I knew then that this was my punishment, my eternal reminder, that every month, on the anniversary of that first horrific call in my old room, I would be forced to listen, to remember my failure, to hear the instrument of his death and know I could do nothing, and the months bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of dread and recovery, each 3 a.m. visitation leaving me more hollowed out than the last. And I started to research, desperately, obsessively, scouring the internet for any similar stories, any folklore about phones and the dead. And I found fragments, whispers of phantom callers and death omens, but nothing as precise, as malicious as this. And I even drove back to the old payphone once, in the blinding light of midday, but it was gone. The entire booth had been ripped out, leaving only a stained concrete pad and a few severed wires that curled from the ground like dead worms. And the hopelessness of that discovery was absolute, because there was no source to plead with, no object to destroy. The curse wasn't tied to a place, it was tied to me. It had chosen me as its witness, its monthly audience of one. And I began to change, my life narrowing to the space between these terrible appointments. I dropped out of college, I stopped seeing friends, I moved into a sparse, quiet apartment where the only clock was a battery-operated analog on the wall, its silent, sweeping hand a gentle mockery of the digital countdowns that had haunted me. And I took a night job stocking shelves at a grocery store, a mindless, solitary task that kept me occupied during the witching hours. But no matter where I was at 3 a.m., in the stark, fluorescent-lit aisles surrounded by boxes of cereal, in my car parked by the river, walking the empty streets, the cold would find me, and the ringing would come, sometimes a faint echo as if from a block away, sometimes a deafening peal that seemed to originate from inside my own head, and I would simply stop and stand and endure it, a monthly seizure of the soul. And people noticed, of course they did, my gone appearance, my flinch at sudden noises, the way I'd check my watch with a panicked look every night as 3 a.m. approached. And they wrote me off as a junkie or a mental case, which was fine by me because the truth was so much worse. And then last night, something different happened. It was the 2-year anniversary of that first dare, the night Mark answered the phone and heard his mother, and the cold that swept into my apartment was colder than ever before, a deep space cold that made the windows crackle. And the ringing, when it came, was different too. It wasn't just one phone, it was a symphony of them. A cacophony of overlapping rings from every era. The sharp bell of a rotary, the digital chirp of the 90s. cell phone, the generic marimba of a modern smartphone, all blending into one horrific chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, from inside my refrigerator and my television. And I fell to my knees, my hands pressed to my ears, screaming for it to stop. And in the brief silences between the rings, I heard them, whispers layered over each other, a crowd of voices from the void. And I recognized Mark's mother's gentle apology. I recognized Leo's terrified description of the tree and the taste of blood. But there were more, so many more, voices I didn't know, men, women, children, all whispering fragments of their final moments. A car crash, a fall, a sudden illness, a quiet passing in sleep. A library of deaths all being broadcast directly into my mind. And I understood then the true, monstrous scale of it. The payphone was just a doorway, a single point of access. And I had been chosen not just to witness Leo's death, but to become a receiver, a living antenna tuned to the frequency of the dead. And they were all trying to call home, to leave one last message, and I was the only one who could hear them. And as the ringing finally faded and the cold receded, leaving me shivering and broken on the floor, I knew with a chilling certainty that this would not be the end, that the calls would keep coming, growing longer, louder, more numerous, until my sanity finally shattered under the weight of all those voices, all those final words. And that one day at my own 3 a.m., my voice would just be one more among the countless others, added to the chorus, forever ringing in the ears of some poor soul cursed to listen. The aftermath of that cacophony left me a different kind of broken, a hollowed-out vessel whose only purpose was to await the next transmission, the next monthly assault of sound and sorrow. And my life shrank to the barest of essentials, a grayscale existence where the only color was the blinding, terror-induced white of 3 a.m. And I quit the grocery store job because being around people, seeing the easy, uncomplicated way they inhabited their lives, was a special kind of torture, a reminder of a world I was permanently exiled from. And I lived off savings that were dwindling faster than my will to live, in an apartment that was little more than a soundproofed cell. I'd tacked moving blankets over the walls and stuffed towels under the doors, a pathetic attempt to muffle the unmuffable, to build a fortress against the enemy that resided in the very air. And my days were spent in a numb haze, watching the slow arc of the sun across the floor, counting the hours, the minutes, until the next siege. And the calls did change. They grew longer, the single minute stretching to 2, then 3, the voices and the static between rings becoming clearer, more distinct, more desperate to be understood. And I stopped fighting it. I stopped clamping my hands over my ears and screaming, because the effort was futile and exhausting. And instead I just sat on my bare floor, knees drawn to my chest. And I listened. I let the waves of other people's final moments wash over me, a tsunami of terminal fear and last-second regrets. And I became an archivist of the dead, my mind a morbid library filled with stories that ended at the very moment they were being told to me. The woman who whispered a recipe for her famous peanut butter cookies to her daughter, who would never get to make them. The little boy crying that he was lost and couldn't find his mommy in the big, smoky room. The old man calmly giving the combination to a safe that held letters for his estranged son. And with each voice, a piece of their ending lodged itself in me, a psychic shrapnel that I could never dig out, and the weight of it was crushing, a gravity of grief that pressed me down into the floor, and I started to recognize the signs of an impending call beyond just the cold, a certain pressure in the air, a metallic taste on my tongue, a faint phantom smell of ozone and decay that would precede the ringing by hours. And my body became an early warning system for my own torment. And I knew I couldn't go on like this, that I was eroding, my mind fraying at the edges like an old photograph. So I did the only thing I could think of, the thing I should have done years ago. I reached out to the only other. People who might understand, who had been there at the beginning, and I called Mark, and his voice on the line, older, weary, but still his, was a shock to my system, a touchstone to a reality I had almost forgotten. And I told him everything, the words pouring out of me in a frantic, jumbled rush, the monthly calls, Leo's voice predicting his own death, the symphony of the dead that now visited me. And when I finished, There was a long silence on the other end, so long I thought the connection had dropped, and then he said, his voice quiet and thick with emotion, "I get them too, man." And my blood went cold, not from a supernatural chill, but from a human one, a shared horror. And he explained that his calls were different. They only came on the anniversary of his mother's death. And it was always her, always the same message, the same apology, the same love. And he said it was a torture, but also a perverse comfort, a chance to hear her voice one more time. And he told me Chloe had moved across the country, changed her number, tried to outrun it. But she emailed him once, a year ago, a frantic, paranoid message saying a payphone had started ringing outside her new apartment every night at 3 a.m. And she was losing her mind. And we realized then that it hadn't let any of us go. It had just tailored the horror to each of us, a unique punishment for our original sin of answering, and we agreed to meet, to try and face this thing together, one last time, and driving to meet him. The first time I'd been in a car since Leo's death was a feat of sheer will. Every shadow on the road looked like black ice, every sound like the beginning of a ring. But I made it, and seeing Mark, older, grayer at 21 than anyone should be, was like looking into a mirror of my own suffering. And we went to a diner, the kind that was always open, and over bad coffee we talked for hours, comparing notes, trying to find a pattern, a loophole, a way to break the connection, and it was there in the warm, greasy light of the diner that the idea came to me, a desperate, insane idea born from a year of listening to the dead. I turned to him and said, "What if we answer on purpose?" And he stared at me like I'd lost my mind, which I suppose I had, and I explained, my words tumbling over each other. "We've been treating it like a curse, a punishment, something to be endured. But what if it's not? What if it's a service? A switchboard? They're trying to get a message through, and we're the only line out. So maybe we stop just listening, maybe we start talking back, maybe we ask questions." And the look of horror on Mark's face was absolute. "No, no way. You don't know what you're messing with. We answered once, and it ruined our lives. You want to answer again? On purpose." But the idea had taken root in my fractured mind. It was the only thing that felt like action instead of reaction, the only spark of agency I'd felt in 2 years. And I begged him. I told him I couldn't do it alone, that I needed him there, and reluctantly, fearfully, he agreed, because what else did we have to lose? And so now, here we are, back in my barren, sound-dampened apartment, the moving blankets on the walls making it feel like a tomb, a coffin for the living, and the clock on the wall ticks towards 3 a.m., and the air is already growing cold. The metallic taste is sharp on my tongue, and Mark is pale, sweating, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees, and I am sitting cross-legged on the floor facing him. A digital recorder, a stupid, hopeful, human device, placed on the floor between us, and I am waiting, not with passive dread, but with a terrifying, active anticipation, because tonight, when the ringing starts, when the chorus of the dead begins its nightly broadcast into my skull, I am not going to just listen. I am going to pick up, and I am going to say hello. The silence in the room is no longer just an absence of sound, but a held breath, a vacuum waiting to be filled with a terror so profound it has its own taste and weight. And Mark's eyes are wide, locked on mine, reflecting the same bottomless fear I feel churning in my gut. But beneath it, a flicker of something else, a desperate, wild hope that this insane plan might somehow work, that by engaging the horror instead of just enduring it, we might finally break its hold on us, and the cold intensifies, a deep, marrow-freezing chill that has nothing to do with the apartment's thermostat, and the familiar pressure builds in my sinuses, the air thickening until it feels like we're submerged in ice water. And the first ring is not a sound that enters through my ears, but one that manifests directly inside my consciousness, a violent, metallic clangor that vibrates through every bone. And it's the symphony again, the overlapping tones of 100 different phones from 100 different eras, all ringing in perfect, horrific unison. And I see Mark flinch, his hands flying to his head, and I know he hears it too. The barrier between us has been shattered. The private hells we've each been living in are now a shared space of agony. And the whispers start, the layered, frantic cacophony of final thoughts and last words. a jumble of panic and love and regret that threatens to overwhelm my sanity before I can even begin, and I force myself to focus, to push past the wall of noise, to find a single thread in the tapestry of despair. And I zero in on a voice, a young woman's voice, clear and sharp with fear, repeating, "He's in the house, he's in the house, the closet door is opening." And I take a shuddering breath, my voice a ragged, broken thing in the frozen air, and I speak, not to the room, but into the noise, into the static between the rings. "We hear you. Who is in the house?" And the effect is instantaneous and catastrophic. The ringing ceases abruptly. The whispers cut off as if a master switch has been thrown. And the silence that follows is somehow more terrifying than the noise, a void of pure anticipation. And then a single voice, the young woman's voice, now clear and shockingly close, as if she's standing right next to me, screams, "He is!" And the force of it is physical, a blast of psychic wind that knocks me backwards, and the room erupts, not in sound, but in image, in sensation. The moving blankets on the walls are gone, replaced by faded floral wallpaper. A dresser appears, a messy bed, a closet door swinging slowly open to reveal a depth of shadow that is absolute and hungry, and I can smell stale perfume and dust and the coppery tang of blood. And I am no longer in my apartment. I am there, in her final moment, a ghost in her memory, and I feel her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I feel the cold floorboards under her bare feet. I see the shape emerging from the darkness of the closet, tall and indistinct and radiating a malice so pure it feels like acid on my skin. And I am paralyzed, a spectator to a murder that has already happened, and her scream is inside my head, tearing through my mind, and I want to shut it out, to retreat. But I remember the plan, and with a Herculean effort, I push a thought towards her, a message in a bottle thrown into a storm. "Your name. Tell me your name." And the vision wavers, the intensity breaking for a fraction of a second, and her voice, choked with sobs, replies, "Lydia, my name is Lydia Moss. 17 Oak Lane, please." And the name and address etch themselves into my brain with the permanence of a brand. And then the shape is upon her, and the connection is severed with a finality that is jarring. The floral wallpaper, the bed, the closet, all vanishing, snapping back to the stark reality of my blank-walled apartment. And I am on my back on the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. And Mark is staring at me, his face a mask of utter horror, and he whispers, "What did you do?" "Your nose, it's bleeding." And I touch my upper lip, my fingers coming away wet and red, and the digital recorder between us is smoking slightly, a tiny wisp of gray rising from its plastic casing, its screen dark and dead, and the cold in the room is receding, the pressure lifting, and the ringing does not return. The 3 a.m. hour passes in a silence that is, for the first time in years, completely and utterly normal. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the ragged sound of our own breathing, and we sit there for a long time, not speaking, trying to process what just happened, the violation of it, the intimacy of witnessing a stranger's death, and the crushing weight of the knowledge she imparted, a name and an address that now feels like a sacred, terrible burden. And as the sun begins to rise, painting the room in weak, gray light, Mark finally speaks, his voice hoarse. "We have to find out if she was real, and I know he's right, the compulsion is undeniable. We have been given a message from beyond the grave, and to ignore it feels like a greater sin than answering the phone ever was. So we spend the day in a strange, dreamlike state, fueled by adrenaline and dread, searching online for any record of a Lydia Moss. And after hours of dead ends, we find it, a brief, chilling news article from 3 years ago. Local woman Lydia Moss found deceased in home. Police investigate foul play. And the address listed is 17 Oak Lane, and the article says the case remains unsolved. No suspects, no leads, just a family's unanswered questions and a life brutally ended. And we look at each other, and the reality of what we've done, what we've tapped into, settles over us, a mantle of responsibility that is both terrifying and electrifying. Because we have done the impossible. We have not just received a call, we have answered back, and we have gotten a reply. And we now hold a piece of a puzzle that the police, that our family, that the entire world of the living does not have. And the implications are staggering. The potential for good is immense. But so is the danger, for we have no idea what we are truly meddling with, what the cost of being an operator for the dead might be. And as night falls again, I know with a certainty that chills me more than any supernatural cold ever could, that this is not the end, that the line is now open. And the next call could be for anyone about anything, and it will be our job, our curse, our purpose, to answer it, and to listen and to act. And the payphone is no longer out in the woods or in our dorm rooms. It is inside us, and it will never, ever stop ringing. The knowledge of Lydia Moss is a live wire in my brain, sparking and sizzling with a terrible energy that makes sleep impossible. Her final moments replaying on a loop behind my eyes. The floral wallpaper, the looming shadow, the sheer, petrifying certainty of her end. And it's no longer just about surviving the monthly calls. It's about this new, horrifying responsibility we've stumbled into. A responsibility that feels both sacred and damning. And Mark is just as wrecked as I am. His hands shaking so badly he can't light his cigarette. His eyes hollow from the shared vision of a murder we witnessed but didn't see. And we know we have to do something. We can't just sit on this. We can't let our message die with us in this soundproofed room. So we decide on an anonymous tip, a carefully crafted email from a burner account sent to the detective listed in the old article, mentioning specific, non-public details about the closet door, the layout of the room, details only the killer or a witness would know. And we send it off into the digital void, a message in a bottle tossed into a sea of officialdom. And we wait, expecting nothing, hoping for everything, and for a week, nothing happens. The silence is its own kind of agony. And the approach of the next 3 a.m. is a looming specter, because we have no idea what to expect now, having broken the unspoken rules of this terrible game. Will the call even come? Will it be louder? Will there be repercussions for our interference? The dread is a physical sickness in my stomach, and when the night arrives, the cold comes as it always does, a deep, invasive chill that seems to originate from within my own bones, and the pressure builds, a familiar headache forming behind my eyes, and at precisely 3 o'clock, the ringing begins. But it's different this time. It's not a symphony, it's a single, persistent ring, the old, rotary ring of the original payphone, clear and sharp and focused, and it's not in my head, it's emanating from the dead digital recorder on the floor between us, the little black device now glowing with a faint, internal light, its shattered screen flickering, and Mark and I look at each other, a silent communication of pure terror. And I know what I have to do. I lean forward, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, and I press the imaginary answer button on the dead machine. And I say, my voice barely a whisper, hello. And the voice that answers is not a stranger's, it's a voice I have. Heard 100 times in my monthly torments, the calm, measured voice of the old man giving the safe combination. And he says, clear as day, no static, no echo. Thank you for the message. It has been received. The balance has been noted, and the line goes dead, and the recorder's light winks out, and the room is just a room again, and Mark and I are left staring at each other in bewildered silence. Because what does that mean? The balance has been noted. Is it a good thing? A warning? A transaction? The uncertainty is a new kind of torture. And the next day, Mark calls me, his voice frantic, telling me to turn on the local news. And there it is, a breaking story. The arrest of a man in the decades-old cold case of Lydia Moss. New evidence miraculously coming to light. A forgotten witness coming forward. And the detective is on screen, looking stunned but satisfied, and we know with a certainty that turns our blood to ice, that we did that. Our message was received and the balance was noted, and the feeling is not one of triumph, but of profound, earth-shattering vertigo, because we are no longer just victims of a curse. We are active participants in a system we cannot comprehend, operators on a switchboard that connects the living and the dead, and the weight of that power, and the fear of the debt we may now owe, is heavier than any fear I have ever known. And that night, the call comes again at 3 a.m., from the television this time, which turns itself onto a screen of boiling static, and the ringing is there, embedded in the white noise, and I answer again. And this time it's the little boy who was lost in the smoky room, his voice small and scared, and he gives me an address, a different town, a different state, a fire from 5 years ago, and I write it down with a trembling hand, and I know that this is it. This is my life now. The calls will keep coming, each one a thread from a life cut short, a puzzle piece from a story that needs an ending, and I will have to find a way to pass these messages on, to maintain this terrible, fragile balance, to be the voice for those who no longer have one, all while waiting for the day when the call that comes through is in my own voice. And I have to hope that when that day comes, there will be someone on the other end, someone brave enough or foolish enough to pick up and to listen. Story number 3. The screen was a void of static, a hissing, gray emptiness that had been my world for the last 17 minutes. Ever since the feed cut from that final, gut-wrenching shot of Leo's face, contorted in a silent scream, his body yanked backwards into the impenetrable blackness of the master bedroom on the second floor of the old Blackwood house. The camera he'd so meticulously mounted on his helmet offering one last dizzying, nauseating spin of rotting floorboards and peeling wallpaper before it clattered to the ground, lens facing the dust-choked baseboard, and then nothing, just this infernal electric hum, this blank slate that held the entire Twitch chat, all 12,743 of us, utterly captive, our own messages frozen mid-panic, our collective breath held, waiting for a sign, any sign, that this was all some horrifically elaborate bit, a masterstroke of performance art from a streamer known for his over-the-top stunts. But the silence, the sheer duration of this empty, screaming static, was beginning to erode that hope, replacing it with a cold, leaden dread that sat in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Because I had been there from the very beginning, from the moment Leo, Spectre Seeker, Vance had flashed that winning, gap-toothed grin into his high-definition webcam, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of his gaming rig. The familiar posters of classic horror films and band logos a comforting backdrop in his otherwise pristine streaming den, his energy infectious as he hiked up the chat about tonight's special, one-time-only event. "All right, my beautiful spooky weirdos, buckle the hell up," he'd announced, his voice a familiar, warm baritone that felt like talking to an old friend. "Tonight, we're doing something different, something raw, something completely unscripted. No green screens, no pre-recorded spooky sounds, just me, this camera, and the most legitimately haunted house in the entire state, maybe the entire country, the infamous Blackwood house out on Route 9. The chat had exploded with hype, with donations and bits lighting up the screen like a digital fireworks display, subscribers renewing just for this event, the viewer count climbing from his usual 10,000 to over 50, then 70, then 100,000, a number that would have made any streamer giddy. But Leo had remained focused, a serious glint in his eye that I now realize wasn't just for show. "Now, you all know I'm a skeptic," he'd continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I think most of this stuff is bullshit, but the history on this place, it's heavy. Built in 1880 by Alistair Blackwood, a reclusive industrialist who, according to the stories, was deep into some seriously dark occult practices. The family died here, all of them, under mysterious circumstances. The house passed through a few hands over the decades, every single family reporting the same things. Cold spots, voices whispering from empty rooms, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor upstairs. The last owners, the Millers, they just vanished. Poof. Gone. Left everything behind, clothes in the closets, food on the table, a car in the garage. The police investigation went nowhere. The house has been empty for 20 years, and tonight, thanks to a little creative borrowing of the keys from a friend in the county clerk's office, he'd jangled a set of old, rusty keys on screen. We're going in, live, for the next 6 hours, or until my battery dies, or until I get chased out by some pissed-off ghost. You're all coming with me." He'd held up a powerful-looking flashlight and a backpack filled with extra batteries, power banks, and a second camera as a backup. "This is the real deal, chat. No cuts, no edits. What happens, happens." And with that, he'd grabbed his car keys, ended the stream from his studio, and promised to go live again the moment he arrived on location. I remember the palpable shift in atmosphere 2 hours later when his stream resumed. The video quality shifting from the crisp clarity of his home setup to the slightly grainier, more dynamic feed of his head-mounted GoPro. The audio filled with the sound of crickets and the rustle of a stiff night wind. He was standing before the house, a monstrous, Gothic revival structure silhouetted against a moonless sky, its angles all wrong, the roof sagging in the middle like a broken spine, the windows boarded up with thick, weather-beaten plywood, looking less like a house and more like a tomb. "Jesus," Leo whispered, his breath misting in the cold air, the microphone picking up the slight chatter of his teeth. Pictures do not do this place justice. The air is freezing out here, and I'm not just saying that. It's like a good 20 degrees colder than it was in town. He panned the camera slowly, letting us take in the overgrown yard, the skeletal remains of a child's swing set rusting off to the side, the sense of profound isolation. "All right, let's find a way in. The front door is chained shut, but my guy said the back kitchen door might be. Yeah, look at this." The camera view jostled as he trudged through waist-high weeds, the light from his flashlight beam bouncing erratically, illuminating glimpses of broken bottles, a discarded doll with no eyes, the carcass of some small animal. He rounded the corner to the back of the house, and there it was, a heavy-looking door, slightly ajar, one of its hinges broken, as if it had been forced open from the inside. "Jackpot," he murmured, and the chat, myself included, went wild with a mixture of excitement and fear, spamming "Don't Do It Elio" and Geo back alongside YOLO and Ghost Time. He pushed the door open with a foot, the creak of the old wood echoing unnaturally loud in the silent night, and stepped inside. The interior was a time capsule of decay. The kitchen was a disaster of overturned chairs, cabinets hanging open, their contents, old cans of food, jars of unidentifiable preserves, shattered on the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mold, damp earth, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old copper. "You guys getting this?" Leo whispered, his voice hushed now, the bravado from earlier replaced with a genuine, palpable tension. "The atmosphere in here is oppressive. It's hard to explain, but it feels like the air itself is heavy." He moved slowly through the kitchen into a dining room, the flashlight beam sweeping across a long table still set with fine china, now coated in gray dust, a grand chandelier hanging precariously above, missing several of its crystals. It was here that the first strange thing happened. As Leo was describing the table setting, his light flickered, not a power drain flicker, but a fast, stuttering blink like a camera flash. He stopped talking. "Whoa, you see that? My light just..." And then from somewhere deep within the house, upstairs, came a sound. A single distinct thud. Heavy, deliberate, like a large sack of grain being dropped on the floor. The chat exploded. Leo froze, his breathing the only sound on the stream for a long moment. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Okay, that was probably the house settling. Old houses make noises, right?" But he didn't sound convinced. He continued his exploration, moving into a grand foyer with a staircase sweeping up to the second floor, its once elegant banister now splintered and broken in places. He panned the camera up the staircase into the waiting darkness above. "That's where we're headed eventually," he said, "but let's clear the ground floor first." The living room was next, a cavernous space dominated by a massive stone fireplace, its mantelpiece adorned with faded, water-stained photographs in tarnished silver frames. Leo moved closer to examine them, his flashlight beam illuminating the stern, unsmiling faces of the Blackwood family. Alistair, with his fierce, dark eyes and imposing beard. His wife, a pale, delicate woman who looked haunted even in the photograph. And their 2 children, a boy and a girl, their expressions blank, almost vacant. "Creepy," Leo commented, but as he moved the light away from the last photo, the little girl, something happened. For a single frame, less than a second, the image in the photograph seemed to shift, the girl's head tilting, her eyes seeming to track the movement of the light. The chat saw it immediately, a flood of "rewind that," and "did you see it?" and holy shit, the picture moved, scrolling by at a frantic pace. Leo, focused on moving forward, missed it. "Guys, my battery is already draining faster than it should," he said, his voice laced with a new concern. It's like the cold is sucking the life out of it. I've got my power bank, but still. Weird." He moved into a study, shelves lined with mildewed books, a large oak desk sitting in the center of the room. It was here that the first real interaction occurred. Leo was examining a large, leather-bound book on the desk, its pages filled with intricate, hand-drawn symbols and diagrams, a language that looked ancient and malevolent. "This is some seriously dark stuff," he murmured, tracing a gloved finger over a particularly complex sigil. "This looks like..." He was cut off by the sound of a door slamming shut elsewhere in the house. Not a casual bang, but a violent, explosive crack that echoed through the silent rooms. Leo jumped, his heart hammering loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, spinning around, his light cutting through the darkness of the study towards the open door. The chat was in a frenzy. He slowly crept back out into the foyer. The front door, which he had noted was chained and locked from the outside, was now wide open, swinging gently on its hinges as if someone had just burst through it. But there was no one there, just the empty, dark doorway leading out to the overgrown front yard. "No way," Leo breathed, his voice trembling now. "No fucking way. That door was sealed. I checked it." He walked over to it, shining his light on the heavy chain and padlock, which now hung unbroken from the hasp. It had been unlocked. From the inside. "Someone is here," he said, and the fear in his voice was no longer performative. It was raw, real, and it infected all of us watching. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered him. This was the intermission, the slow, dreadful build where we, the audience, became aware of the danger before the protagonist did. Leo, shaken, decided it was time to go upstairs. "I don't like this," he admitted to the camera, to us. "Something feels really wrong. But we're here. We have to see it through." The staircase groaned under his weight, each step a protest of ancient wood. The second-floor landing was a long hallway, doors lining either side, all of them closed. The air was even colder up here, the smell of dampness stronger, mixed with that coppery scent, which was now unmistakable. The smell of blood, old and dried but potent. He tried the first door on the right. A bathroom. The tub was stained a deep, ugly brown, the mirror above the sink cracked. The next door, a child's bedroom. Faded rocket ship wallpaper, a small bed with a moldy mattress, a stuffed bear sitting in the corner, one button eye missing. It was in this room that the shadow first appeared. Leo was examining the bear, making a sad comment about the children who lived here, when a long, distorted shadow stretched across the wall behind him, cast from the hallway outside the door. It was tall, too tall, and its shape was wrong. It seemed to have too many limbs, its head elongated and misshapen. The chat saw it instantly. "Behind you." "Leo, look out." "There's something in the hall," flooded the screen. Leo, focused on the bear, didn't see the shadow recede. He turned back to the door. "Nothing in here," he said, and moved back into the hallway. He continued down the hall, the chat's warning scrolling by, unseen and unread by him, a chorus of helpless terror. He paused at the last door on the left. "This must be the master bedroom," he whispered, "the source of most of the stories." The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The room was large, dominated by a massive four-poster bed, its curtains moth-eaten and hanging in tatters. An old vanity sat against one wall, its mirror cloudy and dark. In the corner, an old-fashioned baby's crib, the kind with tall, spindly bars. The room was freezing, a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to leach right through the camera lens. Leo's breath plumed thickly in the air. "My God, it's cold in here," he stammered, his words coming out in shivers. This was it, the peak, the moment everything escalated beyond any possible denial. He stepped fully into the room, his flashlight beam dancing over the dusty furniture. And then the door behind him slammed shut with a force that shook the entire frame. Leo yelled, spinning around, yanking on the doorknob. It was locked. Solid. Shit! Shit! He yelled, pounding on the door. The chat was a solid wall of panic, emojis of screaming faces, pleas for him to get out. And then the whispering started. It was faint at first, a multi-layered, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, rising from the very floorboards, dripping from the ceiling. It was the sound of many voices speaking as one, a chorus of anguish and malice. The microphone strained to pick it up, but the words were clear, echoing in the frozen air. Get out, get out, get out, too late. Leo was hyperventilating now, his back against the door, his flashlight beam shaking violently as he swept it around the room. Who's there? He screamed, his voice cracking with pure, undiluted terror. What do you want? The temperature plummeted further. Frost began to spiderweb across the camera lens, and then we saw it. In the far corner of the room, in the darkness behind the crib, a shape began to coalesce. It was a figure, tall and emaciated, its limbs too long and thin, its skin a pale, waxy gray. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, blank expanse of flesh where its features should be. It began to move towards him, not walking, but gliding, its movements unnaturally smooth and silent. Leo saw it. His scream was primal, a sound of utter, soul-crushing horror I will never forget. He fumbled in his backpack, pulling out a large hunting knife he'd brought for protection, holding it out with a shaking hand. Stay back, he shrieked. Stay the fuck away from me. The entity didn't stop. It glided closer, until it was just a few feet from him. And then its head, that smooth, blank oval, began to change. Features began to press out from within, not the features of one person, but a shifting, melting nightmare of faces. Alistair Blackwood's fierce glare, the wife's terrified scream, the children's blank stares, all swirling and merging on that terrible, pale canvas. Its arm, long and spindly, reached out towards Leo, not to touch him, to point. It pointed a single, bony finger past him, towards the vanity mirror. Leo, mesmerized by sheer terror, slowly turned his head to look. The chat looked with him. In the cloudy, dark glass of the mirror, we didn't see the reflection of the room. We saw a different scene altogether. We saw Leo, on his knees in the center of the room, surrounded by 4 shadowy figures, their hands on him, holding him down. And we saw a 5th figure, holding a long, cruel-looking knife. The image was grainy, flickering like an old film reel, but it was horrifyingly clear. Leo whimpered, understanding dawning on him, the knife dropping from his limp fingers and clattering on the floor. This wasn't a haunting. It was a recording, a replay, and he was now a part of it. The entity in the room with him let out a sound that wasn't a sound, a psychic wave of pure hatred that distorted the audio feed into a screech of static. The camera feed shuddered. The flashlight died. For 3 seconds, there was pure, absolute blackness and a screeching whine. When the night vision on the GoPro finally kicked in, bathing the world in a hellish green glow, the entity was gone. Leo was alone in the room, on his knees, sobbing with relief. It's gone, he choked out, a hysterical laugh bubbling up from his throat. Chat, it's gone. It's over. But we could see what he couldn't. In the green-tinted gloom, standing directly behind him, were 4 more of the faceless figures. And they were not alone. The shadows in the room were moving, peeling themselves away from the walls, taking on the same tall, thin forms. Dozens of them, silent, watching. The chat tried to warn him. Our message is a futile, desperate river of "they're behind you," and "run, Leo, run." But it was too late. One of the figures directly behind him reached out its long, spindly fingers and gently, almost tenderly, placed its hands on either side of his head. Leo's relieved sobs cut off instantly. His body went rigid. His head was slowly, inexorably turned to look behind him. He came face to face with the silent congregation of entities. His mouth opened in a silent scream of absolute, paradigm-shattering terror. A scream that held the realization of every bad dream and every childhood fear made manifest. And then they were on him. The feed became a chaotic, nauseating jumble of green-hued limbs and shifting shadows. There was no sound of a struggle, no screams, just the rustle of clothing and the sickening, wet sounds of things I cannot and will not describe. His body was dragged, limp and boneless, into the center of the room, into the exact spot we had seen in the mirror. The camera, knocked from his head during the struggle, skittered across the floorboards and came to rest facing the baseboard, its view limited to a sliver of the room, showing only the rotten floorboards and the legs of the old crib. The audio, however, remained crystal clear. For a full minute, there was nothing but the sound of soft, shuffling footsteps moving around the room, and a low, rhythmic chanting in that same multi-voiced, guttural whisper. Then a single wet, final thud, and then silence. That was 17 minutes ago. 17 minutes of this gray, static void. 17 minutes of a chat that had gone from frantic to pleading to, finally, silent itself. All 100,000 plus of us just waiting, staring into the void, listening to the empty hiss, our minds unable to process what we had just witnessed, hoping against hope for a sign that it wasn't real. And then the static crackles. The screen remains gray, but the audio changes. The hiss diminishes, replaced by the faint sound of breathing. Slow, steady, calm breathing, right into the microphone. It's not Leo's breathing. This is different. Lighter. Higher. Almost playful. A voice, a child's voice, a little girl's voice, sweet and clear and dripping with a malice, so profound it feels like a physical blow. Whispers directly into the mic, each word perfectly enunciated. A venomous secret shared with every single one of us watching. A promise etched into the very fabric of our souls. Your next, chat. The stream instantly cuts to black. The channel, Spectre Seeker, is gone. Deleted. As if it never existed. And I am left alone in the glow of my monitor, in the silence of my room, the echo of that sweet, evil whisper ringing in my ears. And I know, with a certainty that has frozen the very blood in my veins, that it wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. She knows where I live. She knows who I am. She saw me watching. And she's coming. The silence in my room is no longer just an absence of sound. It's a presence, a thick, suffocating entity that presses in on me from all sides, magnified 1,000-fold by the memory of that voice. A voice that bypassed my ears and slithered directly into the core of my brain, coiling around my spine like a venomous serpent. And I can't move. I'm paralyzed in my gaming chair, my fingers still frozen over the keyboard, my eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the Twitch homepage where Spectre Seeker's channel once was, now just a blank, a void, a digital grave marker, and the rational part of my mind, the part that clings to science and logic and the comforting glow of my computer's hardware, is screaming that it was a hoax, a brilliantly orchestrated piece of performance art, a viral marketing stunt for some new horror movie, that Leo is probably laughing right now with his friends, counting his donations, but that rational voice is tiny, a pathetic whisper drowned out by the roaring, icy tsunami of primal fear that little girl's voice unleashed, because it wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, the intimate, knowing, predatory cadence, the way she lingered on the S in next, a soft, sibilant hiss that promised unimaginable suffering. And the chat wasn't a collective noun. It was personal, it was directed, it was a finger pointing through the screen directly at me, at all of us who were witnesses, who saw what we were never meant to see, and my heart is hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage, a frantic, painful rhythm that echoes in the dead quiet of my apartment. And I realize I've been holding my breath, my lungs burning for air, and I finally gasp, the sound shockingly loud in the stillness, and I lurch forward, my hands trembling so violently I can barely type, my fingers slipping off the keys as I frantically open a new browser tab, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, and I type Spectre Seeker into the search bar, hitting enter with a force that nearly cracks the key. But the results are just old clips from weeks ago, highlights of him playing games, reacting to videos, nothing about tonight, nothing about Blackwood House, and I try Twitch streamer disappears live. But the results are just generic news articles about internet safety, nothing current, nothing real, and a cold dread, colder than the air in that cursed bedroom, begins to seep into my bones because it's like it never happened, like it was erased from existence. But I know it happened. I was there, I saw it, I heard it, and the need for confirmation for the solace of shared terror is overwhelming. So I navigate to the Discord server for his community, the Spooky Weirdos, a server usually buzzing with memes and chatter and theories. But as the channel loads, the silence is deafening. The general chat is a torrent of messages, hundreds of them a minute, a waterfall of pure, unadulterated panic people, asking if anyone else saw it, if their stream cut out too, if they heard the voice, the words blurring together into a single screaming entity of collective trauma. And I see usernames I recognize, people I've chatted with for months, all expressing the same soul-crushing fear, the same paralyzing confusion. And it's both a comfort and a confirmation that makes my stomach lurch, because we all saw it, we all heard it, it was real, it was shared. And then a user named Shadow Watcher posts a screen recording, a 2-minute clip from the very end, from the static and then the voice, and the chat explodes again, people begging them to take it down, others demanding they send it to them. And I private message Shadow Watcher, my fingers fumbling over the keys, typing, "Please send me the clip." And they respond instantly, a simple file transfer, and I download it with a sense of morbid, terrifying obligation. And I open it, the video player window small on my screen, and I hit play, and there it is again, the gray static, the hiss, and I have to force myself to breathe, to not look away. And then the breathing starts, that slow, calm, alien inhalation and exhalation. And then the voice, your next chat. And even though I'm expecting it, the effect is undiminished, a physical jolt that goes through me like an electric shock. And I have to pause the video, my hand shaking too much to control the mouse, and I sit there, breathing raggedly, staring at the paused frame of gray. Nothingness, and I know with a certainty that feels like a death sentence, that this is not over, that something has been unleashed, a door has been opened, and we, the audience, are now part of the show, and the rules have changed, and the fear is no longer a spectator sport. It's a contagion, and we are all infected, and my eyes are drawn to the dark corners of my room, to the space behind my door, to the closet with its door slightly ajar, and every shadow seems deeper, more substantive, holding a potential shape within it, and the familiar comfort of my own space is gone, replaced by a landscape of lurking threats. And I keep replaying those final moments in my head, the way the entities moved, the silent, efficient horror of it, the utter lack of struggle, as if Leo's will, his very essence, had been simply deleted before his body was taken. And I think of the little girl's voice, so sweet and so vile. And I wonder whose voice it was, which of the Blackwood children, and what they want, why they are still there, trapped in that cycle of violence, replaying their murder over and over, and why they need an audience, why they need us. And the word next echoes in my skull, a terrifying countdown. And I realize I'm crying, silent tears tracking down my cheeks, born of sheer, helpless terror. Because how do you fight something like that? How do you hide from something that can reach through the internet, that can see you through your own webcam, that knows your username, your IP address, your location? Because of course it does, it's in the digital realm. It's part of the signal now, a ghost in the machine, a virus of pure malice. And I have the overwhelming urge to unplug everything, my computer, my router, my modem, to sever the connection, to hide in a digital blackout, but it feels futile, like closing the barn door after. The horse has not only bolted, but has come back with a taste for blood. And I look at my own webcam, the little green light that indicates it's off, but I never really trust those lights, do I? I have a piece of electrical tape over it for a reason, but now that feels like a pathetic defense, a child hiding under a blanket from a monster that is already in the room. And I can't stop staring at the tape, wondering what is on the other side, if right now, in the darkness of the lens, something is looking back at me, studying me, waiting, and the silence is broken by the gentle hum of my computer's fans, a sound I've always found comforting, but now it sounds like the steady, patient breathing of some great beast. And I hear a noise from outside my window, a faint scraping sound like a branch against the glass. But I live on the 3rd floor, there are no trees that tall, and my blood runs cold. And I sit perfectly still, not daring to breathe, listening, but the sound doesn't come again. And it was probably nothing, a cat on the fire escape, a piece of litter blown by the wind. But the seed of doubt has been planted, And my fear now has a focus, a direction, and I realize I am no longer safe in my own head. My own thoughts are betraying me, conjuring horrors in every shadow, every sound, and I have never felt more alone, more exposed, more utterly and completely prey. The scraping sound doesn't come again, but its echo lingers in the charged air of my apartment, a phantom vibration that has rewired my entire nervous system for panic, and every creak of the old building's settling frame, every hum from the refrigerator down the hall, every distant siren on the city streets outside is now a potential herald of its return, a component of a terrifying symphony composed just for me. And I am frozen in my chair, a prisoner of my own fear, my eyes darting from the darkened window to the closet door to the blank, black screen of my monitor, which feels less like a piece of technology and more like a dormant portal, a sleeping eye that could blink open at any second and show me things I cannot unsee. And the file from Shadow Watcher is still open on my desktop, a digital Pandora's box I dare not click again, but its mere presence feels like an invitation, a beacon, and I know I should delete it. I should scrub it from my hard drive, burn the whole computer. But I can't bring myself to move, because what if it's the only proof left? What if, when the police inevitably come asking questions, because someone must have called them, right? 100,000 people witnessed a man being dragged into the darkness by things that should not exist. This clip is the only evidence that we weren't all collectively losing our minds. The rational part of my brain, that tiny, desperate voice, clings to this notion, this shred of procedural normalcy, that there will be an investigation, that there will be answers, that this nightmare will have a logical conclusion. But the much larger, primal part of me knows, with a sickening certainty, that there will be no police, no news vans outside Blackwood House, no missing person report that leads anywhere but a dead end. Because what would they even report? That a streamer was killed by a ghost on a live stream that no longer exists? They'd dismiss it as a hoax, a prank, a viral stunt, and life would move on for everyone except for us, the witnesses, the ones who heard the promise in that little girl's voice. And this thought is somehow more terrifying than the entities themselves. The utter isolation of this knowledge, the burden of carrying this awful, reality-shattering truth alone. And I force myself to look back at the Discord server, to seek solace in the shared panic, but the torrent of messages has changed. The initial raw terror is curdling into something else, into arguments and accusations, people claiming it was all CGI, deepfake audio, a coordinated social experiment, others swearing it was real and turning on each other, paranoia spreading like a virus, with users pointing fingers, asking who Shadow Watcher really is, why they had a recording ready to go if they were in on it. And then I see a message that makes my blood freeze all over again. A message from a user named Static Lullaby that simply says, "She's in the walls," and it's followed by a string of gibberish, random characters and numbers. And then the user goes offline, their status blinking out, and a minute later, their username is gone, completely vanished from the server member list, and a cold knot tightens in my stomach because that wasn't an argument or a theory. That was a statement, a confession, a warning, and it was silenced, erased. And the digital campfire we had gathered around for comfort now feels like a trap, a web where something is hunting, picking us off one by one. And I have the overwhelming urge to disconnect, to shut down Discord, to close the laptop and hide under my bed like a child. But I can't. I'm trapped by a morbid, terrifying curiosity. I need to know if I'm next, to see if another username will blink out, to look for patterns in the chaos. And that's when I notice it on my own screen, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker in the corner of my display, a single pixel that glows a faint, sickly green for a fraction of a second before returning to black. And I stare at it, my breath catching in my throat, convincing myself it's a dead pixel, a graphics card glitch, anything but what my gut tells me it is. A signal, a sign, a single eye opening in the darkness to look back at me. And the air in my room grows colder, the fine hairs on my arms standing on end. And I know, with a certainty that feels like a physical blow, that I am not alone anymore, that the thing from Blackwood House has found its way through the signal, through the recording, through the very fear that connects us all. And it is here, in my room, breathing the same air, watching from a place I cannot see, waiting for its cue, and the whisper echoes in my mind, not as a memory now, but as a fresh, present thought, your next chat. And I realize the true horror isn't in the waiting, it's in the knowing that the show is already underway, and I am no longer in the audience. The camera is on me, and the world is watching, and there is no way to log off. The single, sickly green pixel doesn't flicker again, but its afterimage is burned onto my retina, a tiny, malevolent star in the black expanse of my monitor. And the cold in the room is no longer subjective. It's a tangible, physical reality, a deep, penetrating chill that has nothing to do with the thermostat and everything to do with the violation of my space. The unseen presence that has woven itself into the very fabric of the air I'm struggling to breathe, each gasp frosting in front of. My face in the dim light cast by my keyboard, and I can feel it, a pressure change, a static charge that raises the hairs on my neck and arms, the same oppressive, heavy atmosphere Leo described feeling in the foyer of Blackwood House. And it's here now, in my third-floor apartment in the middle of the city. The walls feeling less like protection and more like a stage set, flimsy and insubstantial, and my eyes are glued to the Discord server, where the chaos is escalating into pure digital. Hysteria, users reporting their own strange occurrences, a poster falling off a wall for no reason, a child's toy activating in another room, a brief, distorted face appearing in a darkened computer screen. And with each report, the collective terror mounts, a feedback loop of panic that seems to be feeding whatever this is, giving it strength, making it more real. And then a user named Marble Hornets posts a screenshot, and my blood turns to ice water in my veins. It's a grainy, zoomed-in image. From the final seconds of Leo's stream, a freeze frame of the green night vision footage just as the camera was knocked to the floor, and in the extreme corner of the shot, reflected in the cracked glass of the vanity mirror across the room, is not the struggle, not the entities, but a blurred, distorted image of Leo's camera feed itself. And in that reflection of a reflection, visible on the screen of his camera as it lay on the ground, is us, the chat, the live updating comments, a ghostly, impossible superimposition of our digital selves into that physical space of horror. And there, clear as day amidst the scrolling panic, is my own username, my message from those final seconds, a desperate, unanswered Leo run, captured in that mirror for a fraction of a second before the end. And the implication is earth-shattering. It means we weren't just watching. We were there, we were part of the scene, our comments, our fear, our digital presence was visible to them. We were the audience they performed for, and the little girl's whisper wasn't just a threat, it was a curtain call. And the feeling of being watched intensifies exponentially, becoming a physical weight on my shoulders, and I spin my chair around, expecting to see something, anything, but the room is empty, yet the feeling persists, a predatory gaze focused on the back of my head, and I whip back around to my computer. And the Discord server is going insane. People are posting links, not to clips, but to a new live stream, a channel I've never seen before, with no name, just a string of numbers, and with a trembling hand I click it, and a new window opens, and it's a live feed, but it's not from a phone or a camera. The perspective is all wrong. It's high up, looking down, and the image is grainy, washed out in a dull sepia tone, and it takes my brain a long, horrifying second to process what I'm seeing, and when I do, a silent scream locks in my throat, because it's a live feed of my own room. From the perspective of the top corner of the room, near the ceiling, looking down at me sitting in my chair, my face pale and terrified in the glow of the monitor, and I can see the back of my head, my shaking shoulders, the Discord chat open on my screen, and the feed is utterly silent. No sound of my ragged breathing, just a dead, empty audio void, and I look up, frantically scanning the ceiling corner above my door. But there's nothing there, no camera, no device, just empty space, but the feed on my screen is live, it's real, it's happening right now. And as I watch myself on the stream, my on-screen self slowly, mechanically, turns its head to look directly up at the vantage point of the unseen camera, and our eyes meet, my own eyes on the screen meeting my real eyes. And the horror is absolute, a complete dissolution of reality, and in the dead silence of the stream, a new sound begins, faint at first, then growing clearer, a soft, rhythmic creak, creak, creak like someone slowly rocking in an old wooden chair, and I know, with a certainty that shatters my mind, that it's the sound of the rocking chair in the nursery of Blackwood House. And it's not coming from the stream. It's here in my room, all around me, and the figure on the screen, the me that is me but isn't, raises a single, trembling finger and points it directly at the camera, at me, and its mouth opens, but no sound comes out, and from the darkness behind my own chair, I feel a cold breath on the nape of my neck, and the whispering begins again, not from the computer, but from right behind me, the little girl's voice, sweet and vile, saying, "Sure, the show's about to begin." And I understand now that there is no escape, that the live stream never ended, it just changed channels, and I am the main attraction. The cold breath on my neck is a brand, a searing imprint of absolute zero that paralyzes me completely, locking every muscle in a rictus of pure terror, and my own image on the screen continues to point, its eyes wide with a fear I can feel echoing in my own soul. A perfect feedback loop of horror, where I am both the spectator and the spectacle, the hunter and the prey, and the soft, rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair grows louder, filling my apartment, seeming to come from every direction at once, from the walls, from the floorboards, from inside my own head, and it's accompanied now by a new sound, a faint, muffled crying, the hopeless sobs of a child, and it's so close, so intimate, it feels as if the source is right beside me, its tears dripping onto the shoulder of my shirt. But I dare not turn, I cannot move, I can only stare at the monstrous live stream on my monitor, at the terrified version of myself who is a half-second behind, a ghost in my own machine. And then the pointing finger on the screen slowly curls, beckoning me closer, and I feel an irresistible pressure, an invisible force compelling me to lean forward toward the monitor, my joints moving stiffly, against my will, and the image on the stream shifts, the perspective changing, zooming in on my face as I am forced closer, and I can see every pore, every fleck of terror in my own eyes, and the whispering voice behind me giggles, a sound of pure, childish delight that is more terrifying than any scream, and it says, "We've been waiting for you," and the screen suddenly dissolves into a blizzard of static, but the audio remains, and the crying grows louder, more desperate, and the rocking chair creaks faster, frantic now, and beneath it all I can hear the wet, tearing sounds from Leo's stream, the sounds I had tried to block out, and they are here in my room, happening just outside my field of vision, and the static on the screen begins to resolve, not back into the image of my room, but into a different scene altogether. It's the master bedroom of Blackwood House, from a low angle, as if from a camera on the floor, and I can see the spindly legs of the crib, and the rotting floorboards, and lying there, in the center of the frame, is Leo's helmet, the camera still mounted on it, and the view is static, and I realize with a jolt of nauseating clarity that this is live, this is the feed from the camera that was left behind, still transmitting, still broadcasting from that cursed room, and nothing moves in the frame for a long moment, and then a single pale, small hand enters the view from the top of the screen, fingers trailing along the dusty floorboards, tapping a slow, irregular rhythm, and the giggling comes again, both from behind me and from the computer speakers, in perfect, stereo unison, and the hand is followed by an arm, and then a face leans into the frame, the face of a little girl, her features blurred and shifting, her eyes dark, empty pools, and she smiles at the camera, a smile that stretches far too wide, and she reaches out and picks up the camera, and the view swings dizzyingly, showing the empty room, the walls now covered in hundreds of overlapping, frantic messages written in what looks like filth or blood, all the comments from the chat, our names, our pleas, our terror, etched permanently into the reality of that place. And then the camera focuses, and she is holding it, pointing it at her own face, and she speaks directly into the microphone. Her voice is sweet, poisonous syrup. "Don't worry," she says, "we'll all be together soon." And then she turns the camera around, and I see what she sees, and my mind simply breaks, because she is not in the bedroom anymore. The camera view is of a a familiar hallway with an ugly floral carpet and numbered doors. It's the hallway outside my apartment door, and the perspective is low, at her eye level, and she is walking, the camera jostling with each step, and she is coming closer, toward my door, number 3B, and the feed splits on my screen, showing on one side. The little girls advance down my hallway, live, and on the other side, the view from the ceiling camera in my own room, showing me, frozen in terror, watching her approach, and I hear a soft knock on my apartment door, a polite, gentle tap tap tap, and the whisper is right in my ear now, a cold breath that smells of dust and forgotten things. "Can we come in? We want to play." And the doorknob begins to jiggle, slowly turning back and forth, and the lock, a deadbolt I always throw, begins to strain, metal groaning against metal, and on the split screen, I see the little girl on the hallway feed reach my door and place her hand on the knob, and on the room feed, I see my own hand, moving without my consent, rising from my side, reaching out toward the mouse on my desk, and my finger clicks, and I watch myself, a puppet on a string, open a new browser tab and navigate to my own social media, to my profile, to my list of friends, my family, and a new message window opens, and my fingers begin to type an invitation, a party invitation for a special, exclusive live stream event, a private show, just for them, and the text is filled with emojis and excitement, and I am screaming inside, a silent, internal shriek of denial and horror. But my body is not my own, and the knocking on the door grows louder, more impatient, and the little girl's voice on the stream sighs, "They always make us knock," and the deadbolt finally gives way with a loud, splintering crack, and the door begins to swing open. And the last thing I see on the screen before the feed from my room cuts to static is my own face, looking not at the door, but directly into the ceiling camera, wearing a wide, unnatural smile, a perfect mirror of the little girl's, and my own voice, distorted and wrong, speaks the final words into the microphone. "Welcome, everyone, to the show." The door swings inward on screaming hinges, but the hallway beyond is not the familiar, well-lit corridor of my apartment building. It is a yawning chasm of absolute blackness, a void so deep and lightless it seems to swallow sound itself, and from that darkness steps the little girl, not as a blurry figure on a screen, but in horrifying, high-definition reality, her form shimmering with a faint static haze, her feet not quite touching the floorboards as she glides into my room, and the smell that accompanies her is overwhelming, a foul mix of rotting flowers, damp earth, and that coppery tang of old blood, and she is followed by the others, the tall, thin, faceless entities from the stream, their limbs unfolding from the darkness like spiders emerging from a nest, their smooth heads brushing against my ceiling, and they fill the room, a silent, staring congregation, their presence sucking the warmth and the light from the air, and I am still trapped in my chair, a prisoner in my own body, my hand moving of its own volition to send the invitations, my Facebook, my Instagram, my WhatsApp, a digital chain letter of doom summoning. Everyone I have ever loved to their own private viewing of my damnation, and I can see the responses starting to pop up on the screen. My sister writing, OMW. My best friend sending a heart emoji. My mother asking, "What's the occasion, sweetie?" Each notification a fresh stab of agony, and the little girl drifts closer to me, her head tilting, and her features are still shifting, melting, showing glimpses of the other family members, of Leo's terrified face for a split second, and she reaches out one pale, cold finger and traces a line down my cheek, and where she touches, my skin burns with an icy fire, and she smiles her terrible smile and says, "We need you to be quiet for the performance." And at her words, I feel a sudden, awful pressure in my throat, a constriction that steals my breath, and I try to scream, to warn the people I've just invited, but all that comes out is a strangled, wet gurgle, my vocal cords severed not by any physical blade, but by the sheer reality, altering will of this child thing, and a tear of pure despair tracks down my face, and she catches it on her finger and brings it to her lips, and her tongue, black and forked, darts out to taste it, and she giggles, salty. And then she turns to the faceless ones and nods, and they move in unison, their long limbs reaching for me, not to drag me away, but to position me, to pose me in my chair, turning me to face the computer, arranging my hands on the keyboard, forcing my face into that same rictus grin I saw on the stream. And I am their doll, their puppet, and the little girl climbs onto my desk, sitting cross-legged beside my monitor, and she points at the webcam, the one with the tape over it, and the tape spontaneously curls and blackens, falling away to ash, and the little green light flickers on, and she says, "Look alive, chat is arriving." And on my screen, the private stream I never set up goes live, and the viewer count begins to climb, first by ones and twos, then by dozens, the names of my friends and family appearing in the sidebar, and the chat window explodes with happy, confused messages. "Hey, what's this for?" Surprise party. And the little girl leans into the view of the camera and waves, a sweet, normal wave, and she says in a perfect, charming voice, "Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to my friend's special stream. We're going to play a game," and my hands, moved by invisible strings, type into the chat box, my own username posting. "So excited you're all here," and the entities behind me begin to rock back and forth, a slow, swaying motion, and their faceless heads begin to change, the smooth flesh bubbling and reforming into the faces of the people in the chat. My sister's face appears on one, my mother's on another, their features stretched in silent screams, their eyes pleading, and the little girl giggles again, pointing at the screen. They want to be part of the show too. Everybody gets to play, and I can feel something building in the room, a pressure, a frequency, a wrongness that is pulling at the edges of reality, and the walls of my apartment begin to bleed, not blood, but a thick, black static, and the floorboards dissolve into the same grainy, green-tinted nightmare of Leo's stream. And the boundaries between my world and Blackwood House are collapsing. We are merging, becoming one single, endless haunted broadcast, and the little girl looks directly into the camera, her eyes now black holes into an infinite void, and she whispers to my audience, to my loved ones. The game is called Follow the Leader. And I'm it, and she points at me, and my body stands up against my will and turns to face the room, and the entities part, and I see that my apartment door no longer leads to a hallway. It opens onto the master bedroom of Blackwood House, and waiting there in the center of the room, surrounded by shifting shadows, is Leo, or what's left of him, his body contorted into a broken pose, his eyes wide and unseeing. And the little girl says to me, her voice now the only sound in the universe, "Your turn." Story number 4. The fluorescent lights hummed their usual, monotonous dirge above the nurse's station, a sound so constant it had become the very blood pumping through the veins of St. Ignatius Hospital at night, a rhythm I'd grown so accustomed to over my 15 years on the graveyard shift that its absence would have been more alarming than its presence, the only other noises being the soft clack of Brenda's knitting needles, the occasional rustle of Paul flipping through a patient chart, and the distant, mournful beep of telemetry from down the hall. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday, one of those deep night lulls where time itself seems to congeal into a thick, syrupy nothingness, and we were all fighting the pull of it, eyelids heavy, the bitter coffee in my mug doing little to stave off the creeping inertia, when the intercom crackled to life with a sharp, piercing static that made us all jump, a sound that was always just a little too loud, a little too harsh for the quiet hour, and then the voice, flat and digitally dispassionate, the same one that called for doctor assists and custodial cleanups, echoed through the empty corridors. Code blue, room 606. For a heartbeat, a single, suspended moment of pure confusion, we all just stared at each other. Brenda's needles froze mid-stitch. Paul's head snapped up from his paperwork, his brow furrowed. Because the order was all wrong, the cadence off. Codes are called by the specific location, like Code Blue, ICU, or Code Blue, Ward 4 West, not by a room number. And then a second later, the reality of the number itself hit me like a physical blow to the chest, a cold dread that started in my stomach and radiated outwards, chilling my fingers, because room 606 didn't exist, not anymore, it hadn't for decades. It was a piece of hospital history, a ghost story told to wide-eyed new hires, a wing that was sealed off after some long-ago tragedy, a fire or an outbreak. The details were always hazy, purposefully forgotten, the door bricked up and painted over so many times it was now just a blank, anonymous stretch of wall in a forgotten hallway near the old psychiatric wing. "What in God's name was that?" Brenda whispered, her voice trembling, her knuckles white around her knitting needles, and Paul, ever the pragmatist, already had the phone to his ear, barking into the receiver. "Maintenance, this is Nurse Paul on 6 West. We just had an intercom glitch, a false code blue call for a sealed room. Can you check the system?" But even as he spoke, the intercom crackled again, that same jarring burst of static, and the voice returned. But this time it was different, strained, a faint undercurrent of panic woven into its digital flatness. "Code blue, room 606. Stat." The word stat hung in the air, a command, an urgent plea, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My professional training screaming at me to move, to run, to respond to a code. It's a drill beaten into you so deeply it becomes instinct. But my feet felt bolted to the linoleum floor, my limbs heavy with a primordial fear that this was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "They said it's not them," Paul said, hanging up the phone, his face ashen. "The intercom system for the old wing's been disconnected for 20 years. It's not even on the same grid. They said it's impossible." As if to contradict him, to mock his logic, the intercom erupted a third time, but now the voice was shredded with distortion, cracking and breaking like a bad radio signal. And beneath the words, I could have sworn I heard something else, a low, wet gurgling sound. "Code blue, room 606. Please, anyone, please." The desperation in that synthesized voice was unbearable. A sound that shouldn't exist, a machine begging for help. And that's when the lights above us flickered. Not a full brownout, just a quick, stuttering dip in intensity that made the shadows in the hallway seem to leap and writhe for a fraction of a second before steadying again. And a low hum I'd never heard before, a subaudible vibration that I felt more than heard, began to thrum through the soles of my shoes. "We have to check," I heard myself say, my own voice sounding thin and reedy far away. "We have to, it's a code." It was Brenda who finally moved first, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "She's right, it's procedure, we have to verify." And with a resolve that shamed my own paralysis, she grabbed the crash cart, its wheels squeaking ominously in the profound silence that had descended upon the ward, a silence that felt heavy, expectant, listening. The walk down the corridor towards the old wing was a journey into another world, the familiar, clean scent of antiseptic and bleach gradually giving way to the older, deeper smells of dust, damp plaster, and something else, something faintly metallic and sweet, like old blood or spoiled medicine. The lights here were fewer, some of the fixtures dark, others buzzing fitfully, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for us as we passed, and the temperature dropped with every step. Cold that seeped through my scrubs and clutched at my skin. Paul had produced a large, rusty key from the administrative lockbox, his hand shaking so badly he could barely fit it into the ancient lock on the door that marked the entrance to the sealed wing. A door that was always locked, always off limits. And as the mechanism turned with a loud, grating shriek of protesting metal, the sound echoed down the dark, deserted hallway behind us, and I had the sudden, unshakable feeling that we were being followed, that something was moving in the darkness we were leaving behind, keeping pace with us just out of sight. The door swung inward with a groan, releasing a gust of frigid, stale air that smelled of decay and forgotten things, and we entered a time capsule. The hallway here was narrower, the floor tiles a faded, cracked linoleum in a hideous pea-green pattern that was popular half a century ago. The walls a dingy yellow, peeling in places to reveal older layers of paint beneath. And the air was thick with dust that motes that danced in the beams of our flashlights like frantic, microscopic ghosts. The only sound was the frantic roll of the crash cart's wheels and our own ragged breathing, which plumed in the icy air, and that low, pervasive hum that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. Room 606 was at the very end of the hall, and as we approached, the feeling of dread became a physical weight on my shoulders, a pressure in my skull, and I began to hear things, faint, whispery sounds that skittered at the very edge of my hearing. A faint, rhythmic beeping that wasn't coming from our cart, a soft, shuffling footstep from a room we'd just passed, a child's distant, muffled sob that was there and then gone, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. The door to 606 looked newer than the others, reinforced with steel bands and a heavy modern deadbolt, clearly part of the sealing process, but set into the old, scarred wood, and on it, the number 606 was stenciled in faded, chipped black paint. Paul fumbled with the new key, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and as the deadbolt finally slid back with a heavy, final thunk, the intercom system somewhere in the ceiling above us, an ancient, rusted speaker grill I hadn't even noticed, crackled once, weakly, and the voice, now barely a whisper, frayed and broken, hissed, code blue. Room 606, too late, and then fell silent forever. Paul threw his shoulder against the door, and it opened not with a squeak, but with a soft, sighing sound, like a long-held breath finally being released. And the smell that hit us was unmistakable and horrifyingly out of place. The sharp, clean scent of rubbing alcohol, the sterile odor of fresh linen, and underneath it, the faint, coppery tang of blood. It was the smell of a hospital room currently in use, a living, occupied space. We stood frozen in the doorway, our flashlights piercing the gloom, illuminating a scene that made my mind recoil, refusing to process it. The room was pristine, clean, modern even, completely at odds with the decaying hallway outside. The bed was made with tight, military corners, a fresh pillow and a crisp white sheet, and on the bedside table sat a pitcher of water beaded with condensation, a clean glass, and a heart monitor. Its screen dark, but its housing free of dust. But it was the bed itself that held our horrified gaze. The sheets were rumpled, the pillow indented, as if someone had been lying there just moments ago, and when I, driven by a force beyond my own will, reached out and placed my hand on the mattress, I yanked it back with a gasp. It was warm, body warm, the lingering heat of a living person sleeping there. No, this is impossible, Paul was muttering, a mantra of denial as Brenda, her face a mask of terror, pointed a trembling finger at the heart monitor. As if summoned by her attention, the screen flickered to life with a soft ping, a green, steady line tracing a perfect sinus rhythm across the blackness, beeping softly, steadily, the sound of a healthy, resting heart, and then beside it, a respirator that I hadn't even seen in the shadows suddenly hissed, its bellows expanding and contracting, pumping air into an invisible patient. My eyes, wide with terror, scanned the foot of the bed and found the chart, a modern, plastic-clipped board, and I snatched it up, my fingers leaving smudges on the clean, clear plastic, and the name typed on the label was John DOE. But the admission date printed beside it was today's date, and the time was from just 2 hours ago, and the vitals scribbled in the log, steady pressure, strong pulse, stable rhythm, were all recent, all updated, all for a patient lying in a warm bed that was an A. Room that had been sealed for longer than I'd been alive. That's when the lights in the room, a single, bright fluorescent panel in the ceiling, began to flicker violently, strobing, and in the frantic pulses of light and darkness, I saw him. A tall, impossibly thin figure, a man in a long, dark doctor's coat, standing in the far corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, his face pale and elongated, devoid of features except for two dark, hollow pits where his eyes should have been. And he was holding a chart, identical to the one in my hand, and he was staring directly at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, my throat sealed shut by pure, undiluted terror, and in the next strobe of light he was gone. But the feeling of being watched, of being seen by something ancient and hungry and profoundly wrong, remained, pressing in on me from all sides. The heart monitor's beeping began to accelerate, faster and faster, escalating from a steady rhythm into a frantic, panicked tachycardia, the green line spiking wildly on the screen, and the respirator began to wheeze and choke, its hiss becoming a ragged, desperate gasping sound, and the air in the room grew thick and cold, so cold it hurt to breathe, and the whispers started, not from the intercom this time, but from all around us, from the very walls, a chorus of faint, agonized voices, pleading, begging, crying for help, for mercy, for a doctor, and beneath it all, I heard one voice clear above the others, the same flat, digital voice from the intercom, but now it was broken, sobbing, saying, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I couldn't save them. I couldn't save any of them. And the door to the room suddenly slammed shut with a force that shook the walls, plunging us into near darkness. The only light coming from the frantic, flickering glow of the heart monitor, which now flatlined, emitting a single, continuous, ear-splitting tone that screamed into the suffocating blackness. And in that final, terrifying flash of light before the monitor itself died, I saw the figure again, right in front of me, his featureless face inches from mine, and I felt an icy, skeletal hand brush against my cheek, and a voice, not a whisper but a clear, cold, clinical thought inserted directly into my mind, said, "The system must be maintained. The rounds must be made. The code must be answered." When the lights in the hallway outside finally surged back to full strength and security burst through the door, finding us huddled on the floor, sobbing and incoherent, the room was exactly as it should have been. Thick with decades of dust, the bed frame rusted and bare, the machines ancient, silent relics covered in grime and cobwebs, the patient chart gone from my hand as if it never existed. They wrote it off as a shared hallucination, a mass hysteria triggered by a faulty power transformer and the stress of the night shift. A story they forced us to repeat until even we began to doubt our own senses. But I know what I felt, what I saw, what I heard, and every night since, when the hospital grows quiet and the hum of the fluorescence becomes the only sound, I hear it, faint but clear, a ghost in the wiring, a echo in the pipes, the intercom in an empty hall crackling to life, and a voice, sometimes calm, sometimes desperate, but always calling, always pleading, for a code blue in a room that doesn't exist. And I know, with a certainty that chills my soul, that it's a call that must be answered, a duty that forever remains, and that someday, someone else will have to go down that dark hallway. And I pray to a God I no longer believe in that it isn't me, because the doctor is still making his rounds, and he always needs a new nurse for his team. They sent me home for a week with a prescription for sedatives and a card for the employee assistance program, the kind of bland, concerned gestures management uses to plaster over things they don't understand and don't want to. And for those 7 days I tried to lose myself in the mundane noise of daytime, in the glare of the sun and the sound of traffic and the simple, grounding reality of making coffee and doing laundry. But the daylight world had become a thin veneer, a fragile film over. Something vast and dark and hungry that had been waiting just beneath the surface all along. And the night, my old domain, was now a different country, one I was terrified to re-enter. Brenda never came back. She took an immediate early retirement. Her nerves shot to hell, and Paul transferred to the pediatrics day shift, his hands still shaking too badly to insert in 4. He told me over the phone in a hushed, broken voice, and I was left alone, the last one who knew, the last one who had felt the warmth of that impossible bed and heard the desperation in that digital sob. And the weight of that knowledge was a stone in my gut, a constant, cold companion. When I returned to work, the night shift was staffed with fresh faces. A young man named Leo and a woman my age named Sarah who had transferred from a hospital that had closed down. And they knew the official story, the power surge, the shared stress hallucination, and they looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, carefully avoiding the subject, treating me like a convalescent, which in a way I was, but I was convalescing from a wound no one else could see. The first night back was a special kind of torture, every flicker of the lights making my heart hammer against my ribs, every innocuous overhead page causing me to flinch, my body humming with a constant low-level terror, my ears straining for a sound I both dreaded and perversely expected to hear. But the night passed with a brutal, mundane normality, the usual chest pains and insulin adjustments and confused elderly patients. And by the end of it, I was exhausted not from work, but from the sheer tension of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The second night was the same, and the third, and slowly, insidiously, the rational part of my brain began to win out, began to whisper that maybe it had been a hallucination, a perfect storm of suggestion and faulty wiring and sleep deprivation, that the warmth of the bed had been a heating pipe running beneath the floor, the voices a trick of the wind in the old ducts, the figure a shadow cast by the strobing light, a comforting, logical lie I desperately wanted to believe. It was on the fourth night back, during the deadest hour between 3 and 4 a.m., that the feeling returned, that subtle drop in temperature, that subaudible hum vibrating up through the linoleum into the bones of my feet. And I looked up from my charting to see Sarah and Leo looking around, their expressions puzzled, Sarah rubbing her arms against a chill they couldn't explain either. And that's when the intercom in our station, the modern one, the one that was definitely connected and functional, let out a burst of static that was utterly wrong, a sound of tearing fabric and screaming metal compressed into a split second, and then a voice, a different voice, a real human voice choked with tears and raw panic. A young woman's voice, a nurse's voice shrieked, "Code Team TO606. For God's sake, anyone, he's crashing." And then it cut off with a finality that was louder than any sound. Leo jumped up, his training kicking in. "What the hell was that?" "Did you hear that?" he said, already half out of his chair. But Sarah and I were frozen, locked in a shared paralysis of dread, because we both knew, we both felt the wrongness of it, the ancient fear that had been waiting in the walls of this place for decades. "It's a glitch, it has to be," Sarah said, but her voice was trembling, her eyes wide with a fear she didn't understand but felt in her marrow. And before I could stop him, before I could form the words to tell him to stop, to not acknowledge it, to not listen, Leo was on the phone to security, repeating the same futile words Paul had spoken weeks ago, and getting the same impossible answer. The system was clear. No page had been made. The old wing wasn't even on the grid. We sat in terrified silence for 10 minutes, 20, the clock ticking impossibly slowly, the cold in the air intensifying, that low hum growing steadily louder, now a palpable vibration in the fillings of my teeth. And then the lights along the hallway leading to the old wing began to flicker, one after another, like a wave of dying energy rolling towards us. And from the darkness down that corridor, we heard it, the distinct, squeaky roll of a crash cart's wheels, moving slowly, purposefully, towards the sealed wing. Leo heard it too, his bravado gone, his face pale. "Is someone down there?" he whispered, and against every screaming instinct in my body, a terrible, morbid curiosity took hold, a need to see, to know, to confirm that I wasn't insane. And I found myself standing, moving towards the mouth of the dark hallway, Sarah and Leo following close behind me, drawn by the same awful fascination. The squeaking of the wheels stopped, replaced by the sound of a door groaning open on rusted hinges, the sound we had made weeks before, and then the soft, sighing sound of it closing, and then silence, a silence so deep and absolute it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. We stood there at the threshold of the dark hall, peering into the gloom, and then a single light flickered on at the very end, the light from room 606, spilling a sickly yellow glow into the hallway, and silhouetted in that light was the crash cart, parked neatly outside the door as if waiting for a team to arrive. That's when the whispers started again, but this time they weren't pleas for help. They were clinical, detached, the calm, measured tones of a medical team at work, but horribly distorted, as if heard from the bottom of a well, phrases like "flatline, charge to 200, and "no pulse, beginning compressions," and "AP, push the AP now." A ghostly resuscitation effort playing out in the empty air, and beneath the voices, the steady, metronomic beep of the heart monitor from that night returned. But it was faltering, skipping beats, then spiraling into the frantic shriek of the flatline, the same unbearable tone that had screamed into the darkness before. And as it reached its crescendo, the door to 606 flew open with a violent bang, and the crash cart was yanked inside by an unseen force, the door slamming shut again, and the light went out, plunging the hallway back into darkness, the only sound the ragged sound of our own panicked breathing. We fled, stumbling back to the nurse's station, huddling together like children, calling security again, our voices hysterical. But when they arrived, flashlights sweeping the halls, they found nothing. The hallway to the old wing was quiet, dark, and still, the door to the wing itself securely locked. The crash cart from our station was right where it was supposed to be, and they looked at us, the three of us, with a mixture of annoyance and deep concern, and I knew then that we were marked, that we had answered the call by listening, by bearing witness. and that it knew we were here. The pages have started coming every night now, not just over the intercom, but on our pagers, text messages on the hospital phones that show no sender. Always for 606, always a code, sometimes a blue, sometimes a gray, sometimes for a Dr. Eldritch to report immediately. A name that sends a fresh bolt of ice through my veins every time I see it. And the cold is a permanent presence on the ward now, a deep, settling chill that no thermostat can fix, and the new staff have quit, one by one unable to articulate what's wrong, but knowing, on a primal level, that this place is sick, that it is haunted not by a ghost, but by a system, a protocol of death that refuses to end, a critical event caught in an eternal, horrific loop. I am the last one left from that night, the only one who remembers the warmth of the bed, the only one who saw the tall, thin doctor with his featureless face. And I know why I stay, why I can't leave. It's not loyalty or bravery. It's because he looked at me, and he chose me. And the thought that comes into my head now, during the deepest, coldest part of the night, isn't my own, it's his, a cold, clinical assessment. The shift is short-staffed. The rounds are behind schedule. The code is still active. And I know, with a certainty that has become my entire reality, that soon the page will come for me not to respond, but to assist, and the door to 606 will be waiting, open, the bed warmed and ready, the monitors beeping their steady, waiting rhythm, and Dr. Eldritch will be there, chart in hand, his hollow eyes fixed on me, and he will not ask. He will simply expect me to take my place at the bedside, to join the team, because in a hospital, the system must be maintained, the rounds must be made, and the code, forever and always, must be answered. The silence after security left was heavier than any I'd ever known, a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb all sound and light and hope, leaving only the three of us huddled at the nurse's station, shivering not from the pervasive cold, but from a terror so complete it felt like a fundamental change in our very chemistry. And in the days that followed, the hospital administration, in their infinite, sterile wisdom, decided the best course of action was to pretend nothing was happening, to label us as suffering from collective stress, and to quietly bring in agency nurses to fill the gaps, fresh faces who knew nothing of the history, who would work a single shift and then never return,